Well, should we call the meeting to order? We need to adopt the agenda from our last meeting in August. Motion for that? Or today's, agenda for today of the minutes, yeah. Let's do the agenda for today. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. And then we need the approval of minutes from August 3rd and August 8th. Both meetings.
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. This is time for public comment. Would anybody like to? Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. So we're ready for the actuarial evaluation.
Moving along.
Moving right along.
Yeah.
Yep, so she's all ready to go. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. With me, if you haven't had a chance to meet, is Matthew Johns. He works on our team. I would say the whole Montana team. We have about 6 people in the office who are dedicated to it. Joey would have been here, except he just had a baby, so he's, he's got to handle that. So anyways, we're here to present the results of the July 1, 2018 valuation. So you guys, I'm pretty sure all have a presentation. Yep. So as usual, we'll go over that, and then if there's any questions about the valuation report, we can address those as well. So we always start off our presentations with this basic recurrent funding equation. We also call it the Tom Cavanaugh equation. He's one of the founders of our firm. But basically what this tries to do is to simplify kind of what we're doing for you, our role as the actuary. So I like to consider us professional savers. We're not really investors. So and so on the left-hand side, what we have is what you're saving, contributions, and then they get invested and earn income. And on the right-hand side, you have what you have to pay out, the benefits and admin expenses. What we do is, because this is a defined benefit pension plan, we don't know what someone's pension is going to be until they actually retires. It's based on service and pay and the formulas. So what we do is we estimate that benefit payment stream and try to come up with a liability for it. And from there, basically determine the amortization period, because the contributions are set in statute and they don't change. If we go to the next slide, the benefits side of this equation are based on the plan provisions. So the plan provisions define what benefits actually get paid, and then the experience. So when people actually retire or die, if there's survivor benefits, or withdraw and then delay, get a vested benefit when they reach retirement age. So the experience, the plan provisions and experience will predict or determine what the benefit payment stream is. On the contribution side, in the short term, the actuarial assumptions and the actuarial cost method determine the contributions. An actuarial cost method is just a budgeting tool used by actuaries. There's many of them. We use entry age normal. It's a prescribed methodology. It's a prescribed methodology in GASB, and it also produces very level contribution rates. So, in terms of an employee's career, it's a level cost over the entire career. And employers typically enjoy that because it's easy to budget, essentially. In the long term, though, the contributions is really just a balancing item based on the other 3 items. So in theory, you could close the plan today, wait until the last person dies, and go back and do an accounting of how much did we actually pay to pay for the benefits. So roughly about 60 to 70% of what gets paid out comes from investment income. So it's a very efficient process. It's a cheaper way to provide benefits to retirees. And just lastly, now, the context in which we talk about this equation is mainly retirement benefits, but it can be used for anything. Saving for a car, saving for a house, anything. So One of the things that we have working for us with retirement benefits is it's a long time horizon. You know, a car or house, if you have a shorter time horizon, you don't have enough time to build up a lot of the investment side, so you have to save a lot more cash.
May I ask you a quick question just on the assumptions?
Yes.
Just, I'm curious in terms of cost of living allowance adjustments in the future, is that all based on past experience?
Well, they're set in this plan, so it's not based on CPI,
Okay.
so it doesn't matter. It's just
At
based
what
on
level?
It's 1.5%. And then there is the new tier that has a slightly lower, it's like 0.5% right now.
Okay.
But they can get up to 1.5 depending on the fund status of the plan.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
okay. Now, just comments on the valuation. So, on the asset return side, the market value, we earned 8.82% based on our calculations, against the assumption of 7.75% for the year. So that's a gain of just over 1% there. But on the actuarial side, where we smooth gains and losses over a 4-year period, there's actually earned less than 7.75, it only earned 6.85%. And so that had an impact on the plan because it's a loss, it's an investment loss. Right now, the market value of assets is $54 million higher than the actuarial value. So what that means is that there's actually some gains built into the smoothing method right now. But how that's going to get recognized is next year we anticipate an actuarial loss again on the assets, but then followed by 2 years of actuarial gains. And the fact that you earned 8.82% over the assumed rate, that actually helped offset the loss a little bit this year that we were anticipating on this year. So overall, the assets, we have some gains, but we still have the loss that we have to recognize next year.
Yep, so it's in here.
The funding ratio decreased from 70.5% to 68.2%, and the amortization period increased from 22 to 31 years. And there are some major factors into that, and we'll go over that on the next page. We had just done an experience study that we presented last, I guess, May, right? And so we're now implementing the changes, recommendations from that experience study into this valuation. And here we list some of the changes. We reduced the CPI, reduced the investment return assumption, reduced wage growth from 4 to 3.25, updated mortality rates, and rates of termination, retirement, and salary increases. And then also the board's adopted payroll growth assumption of 4 to 3.25.
Can I ask you a quick question on the mortality rates?
Yes.
Haven't those dropped?
You mean?
The
Yeah.
expectations for
Yeah,
mortality?
that's right.
Yeah.
So we
So that would
improved,
actually
yeah,
improve-
we improved mortality, but then that adds cost because people are going to be living longer,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. 'Cause-
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Yep. So as a result of the experience study, the amortization increased from 23 years to 31 years. And the unfunded liability increased by $206 million. And that's exactly pretty much on the numbers of what we had anticipated when we showed the impact on the experience studies.
So Todd, really we were 22 last year, right? So we went from 22 to 31. So was the loss on the assets only
Yeah,
1
so,
year?
yeah, it's
essentially?
1 year, yeah.
Yeah, so had we not, I mean, really being slightly, a little bit below the actuarial rate of return there at 6.85% didn't cost us very much of that increase. in
That's right,
amortization.
And the total payroll didn't grow at the 4% that we would, based on last year's either, so, so that contributed to it too as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
So real quick, maybe, do you want to talk, because I know this confused me when I was going
Oh,
through the
the
report,
investment.
where everything says, still saying 7.75%, and really, I mean, we know we changed the
Okay.
assumption to 7.5.
Yep.
You want to maybe explain?
Yeah, I was gonna-
Explain it to you what's wrong.
I was going to do that. So when we change the investment return assumption, it's really looking forward, so from the valuation date looking forward. So for the year up to, so last year, we're still anticipating 7 3/4. So now going forward, so you see that kind of lag in what you expect on the return side. So next year, you'll see the 7.5, everything will be based on 7.5 going forward.
That amount will change what this looks like.
Yeah, because if you have, if your bogey's lower, so you have, you can either have smaller losses or bigger gains, essentially.
And over the next couple slides, we summarize the data of the teacher system. And the data is really kind of the foundation of the valuation. Because what we do is we take each person and we calculate liability for them and sum them all up. And so the data is really important because it is, each person we do assign a liability to. And these next couple slides just summarize the data of the system. And since 2007, there's been roughly a 0.5% annualized increase in the number of active members in the plan. And over the last year, there was an almost 2% increase in the total active headcounts in the teacher system. And since 2007, the number of retired members has had a little over 3% annualized increase. And over the past year, that increase was about 2.5%. And 11 years ago, there were 0.6 retirees per active member. Now there are 0.8 retirees per active now. And that's a trend we would expect to continue to see as you have more and more retirees coming into the system, and especially if active headcounts aren't growing as fast as the retirees, we would expect that same trend to continue. Just to note, that's something that you do expect to see in plans that are maturing, that have been just around longer. You would expect to see that ratio become just greater and greater, more retirees per active.
Indefinitely, or does it eventually stabilize?
Eventually, a long time in the future, you will see total headcounts come down when you finally start to see, this sounds really morbid, but when you finally start to see mortality catch up to the hiring rates, you'll start seeing, total headcounts drop, but that's usually on a very, very mature plan.
Is there an anticipated date when the ratio is 1:1?
We'd have to do a projection, but it could be, see, we anticipate the number of retirees, and that's what we're doing as part of the process. We're projecting out the retirees and the benefit payment stream. So, but the only way you'd see that, I think, get close to 1 is if the actives decline a little bit. So in fact, it's stable right now. So typically you would see that number kind of stay there, I think. There was a slight uptick last year in numbers. So, but again, that's really driven by just the active workforce. And again, that's why you have assets. That's why we have assets to pay benefits. That's why you're saving, because you build up assets, and when you're not paying anything out for like in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now you're going to rely on those assets to pay the benefits.
Okay, and on the next slide, slide number 9, we show the average salary and average benefits for the members of the TRS system. And since 2007, there's been about a 1.7% annualized increase in the average salary. And over the past year, there was 0.7% increase in the average salary. And for benefits, there's been a 2.7% increase in the average annual benefit paid out since 2007, and roughly a 2.1% increase in benefits paid out over the past year. And the reason that these increases are more than the 1.5% COLA rate is because even if the headcounts for retirees stayed constant, we would expect to see that average benefit increase 1.5% a year. But then when you have the headcounts growing and you have the COLA, you would expect to see that average annual growth be more.
And
Be
those
greater.
retiree salaries are greater than the ones.
Yeah, the new ones coming on have bigger benefits, absolutely.
Okay, and on slide 10, we show the payroll and the benefits in total for the plan. And in 2018, over the prior year, there was roughly $706 million in salary for the plan.
Now, this is only including full-time members.
Full-time, I'm sorry, for full-time members. And the plan paid out around $368 million in benefits to retirees.
So we got this question yesterday, I just want to point this out. There's no correlation between these two numbers. It's just a way to combine it on a chart to have less pages essentially. So, but yeah, there's no correlation between those, the pay and the benefits.
Okay, and on slide 11, we show the assets of the plan for this year and over the prior, and over some prior years. And this slide does a nice job of illustrating what the smoothing technique for the assets is designed to do. So you can see back in 2008 and 2009, the actuarial value, which is represented by the line, is greater than the market value. And that was because we had big losses in 2008 and 2009, and we recognized those over a 4-year period instead of immediately. And so you can see that over the past really 7 or 8 years, the opposite has happened. The market has been doing really well, and the actuarial value has lagged behind the market value of assets whenever you've had a couple good years of returns in a row. And another thing to point out is that the actuarial value, we're not manipulating the assets in any sort of fashion. So if you were to earn the assumed rate of return, which now is 7.5, if you were to earn that every single year, exactly 7.5% going forward, the actuarial value and market value would be the same number. So the only reason they're different is just because we're smoothing in the gains and losses. We're not doing anything to manipulate the actuarial value.
Yeah, just wanted to also too point out, since 2007, we've exceeded the assumption like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, since 2007. Okay, so finally, now we get, so we use the data to come up with the liability, we compare that to the assets, now we get down to, what does that mean, from a contribution standpoint. So, as of July 1, 2018, the statutory rate is 11.46%. And that will amortize, and we do expect that to continue to grow by the increase in the employer amounts. And that will amortize the unfunded liability of $1.9 billion over 31 years. And the funded ratio declined slightly from 70.5 to 68.2, and that's really just a function of the experience study and also the increase in the amortization period. No surprises there, I don't think, at least. And then on the next slide, we show the gains or losses for the year. Anytime that something occurs that's different than the assumption, it either creates a gain for the system, which is a benefit, or it creates a loss. So the biggest item here, and ideally you would want these to kind of offset each other, essentially. But the biggest one that's sticking out right here is just the assumption change. So the other ones are pretty small. And then finally, we showed just this cash flow history. Cash flow for 18 was positive, meaning with the money put in versus what you pay out with investment income, you have positive cash flow for the year. And as long as the assets earn these, the assumed rate of 7.5, we would expect positive cash flow. So anytime that you're that the assets don't earn, it's a fluctuating thing. Either it's cyclical. So in periods where you don't earn the assumed rate or earn less, like say look at 2008 and 9, you see net cash flow was negative. But if the assumptions are met, net cash flow remains positive, essentially. And then finally, and the reason why we show that is because there's always this big, people try to make a big deal out of, oh, you're spending the money, but that's the point. You're spending the money to pay the benefits. That's why you accumulate the assets. So, ultimately, if you were to close the plan today, for instance, the idea you'd want to run out of money exactly as the last retiree passed away. So you are trying to spend the money. So you just don't want to spend it too fast, essentially. So the next slide, every 2 years we do this other valuation of the MES retirement plan for the supplemental contribution rate. It's been 4.72% since I've been coming here. So this year, the recommended supplementary contribution rate would be 11.89%, which is an increase of 7.17%, and that would amortize the university system members that are in the teachers' retirement system by 2034. So there's only 15 years left on that. So the longer they take, so we'd expect this number to grow every time unless there's really big asset gains, because, they're not, they have shorter and shorter time period to pay it off, essentially, so. And in the valuation right now, we assume that the 4.72% will never go away, because it requires a law change, essentially, so. Or 22, I'm sorry, but it would have gone up to 23 because of the asset loss.
So we went from 22 to 31 because,
All of
primarily
these.
because of all these assumptions.
All these
Can you-
things.
Is there a way to break down roughly what each of these assumptions cost in terms of years? Just a ballpark? I know you didn't actually do the math. but is there-
Yeah, I don't,
I'm just curious about.
I would say the
scale.
biggest one's the investment return, and then the payroll growth assumption. Those are the two biggest ones.
Wasn't that in the data that you presented in the meeting?
Yes, yeah. I think
Based
so.
on last year's valuation, those numbers are, I know they're in my experience.
I have the experience. Here we go. Well, it's sort of a breakout. The demographic changes were 3 years increase, so that's mortality, stuff like that. And then when you combine all the economic and demographic changes, it was, we were anticipating it to be 33 years, so.
I have this question on page 8, when we're showing the relationship between active and retired membership. Right now, we have roughly a 68% unfunded liability. So as that ratio changes and it becomes closer to 1-to-1, is it implied that there's a direct correlation with that unfunded ratio? And would that
No.
necessarily need to go up or down?
Not the ratio, but it could impact the amortization period, because you're funding your unfunded liability over the active payroll. You're taking percentage of pay times that, and anything that's not used to fund the normal cost goes to pay off the unfunded liability.
Mhm.
So if that total payroll pool doesn't grow or shrinks, it will impact how fast you can pay off the unfunded. But from a liability standpoint, you'll get some gains maybe on the active side, because if it's from like salary increases not being as high as we would expect. But most, you have more, it's, you have a lot of retirees now, so it's, from a liability side, you wouldn't see much of a change there. It's more towards, how fast you can pay off the unfunded liability.
So you've mentioned that the age of the plan is important, and do we make an assumption that at some stage there's a stabilization process in this plan? Because it's a perpetual plan, so at some point the ratio of new people coming into the system versus retirees should be assumed to stabilize.
Yeah,
right?
no, exactly. And
Yeah.
I would expect, if things continue on this trend, this 0.8, I don't think we would expect to see a quick change in that number,
Mhm.
okay? But again, it depends on things that we really can't forecast right now, is
Right.
essentially the number of people who are going to be working with the system. So if you see growth in the number of classrooms and number of schools, then that ratio could actually decline.
Do you know, is there a fairly direct correlation between the number of teachers and the population growth? Or is it a fairly direct 1-to-1 relationship, or not?
I would think it's tied to the population, because if you don't have kids, you don't
Right.
need schools, so.
Something to do with demographics.
Yeah, demographics, and I would say in Montana, we do see growth here. In other places, like back east, you're seeing declines. Like in Ohio, you see declines in numbers of schools and teachers, and we work on a school employees plan, which is cafeteria workers and bus drivers. They can't even get people to do those jobs, so.
And that isn't necessarily based on population,
Yeah.
that's on other factors such as
Tax.
homeschool
Yes.
or other types of schools that aren't public schools.
Right.
So, there's no correlation between population and how many teachers you're gonna have, because there are other political factors that affect that more.
But I would say Ohio, though, is definitely an older population compared to, the rest of the country.
But they have,
It's kind of like Florida almost.
they have a big alternative
Yeah,
school
they do.
effort.
They do, yeah.
So I think that's more of it than the
Do we
Yeah, they-
anticipate anything like that occurring in the state of Montana? Is there any indication that alternative schools are going to increase dramatically?
There's always a push.
Yeah, there's always a bill or two to
There's
sort
never
of
been a time
expand
there
it,
hasn't been.
but
Has it gained any traction?
not much, I mean, so far.
Just depends on who you get.
So for the valuation, Todd, just for each valuation, you actually assume that membership's gonna be flat, right? Zero growth. The payroll.
Well,
the
we
membership-
assume that we assume that the total payroll is gonna grow.
Right, but the actual number of members.
Well, so evaluation is a snapshot, so it's really a closed number. So for evaluation, we would expect all these numbers to go to zero, essentially. But for funding of the unfunded liability, we know that it's open and that, you know, you should see some growth in payroll, and so we take that into account in coming up with the amortization period. So it's really a snapshot of just the people in the plan on the valuation date. We can do things like projections. We've done it in the past where you basically do evaluation every year and you manipulate the population however you want it to look like. So you can, as people retire, you replace them with new entrants and you can project growth in that number, you can project declines in that number. So you can actually see where, possible outcomes for the plan, like long-term type of things.
On page 12 here, each year when you come, it's typically what we should ask the legislature for, correct?
Well, no, because.
So this isn't, that 11.46 is not,
That's the statutory rate. So what we're solving for, because it's the only variable, is the amortization period.
oh, okay.
So if you wanted to solve for, say you wanted to amortize this over 20 years, that's a higher number than 11.46, and then we could tell you that, and then you could try to get it. And this also includes the $25 million that goes in every year as well.
This part here does.
Yeah, the 31 years does, so.
And it's projected to decline each year, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's always something to that.
so really, if we were to bring anything forward to this legislative session, by the time it were effective, we should be 30 next year anyway, and that's sort of the rule as far as actuarially sound basis is 30 years.
Thanks.
But on the MUSRP, it is that, the
It
last
is
slide
that
is
number.
we would need a 7.17% increase.
Increase.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what
And that would help the system.
Yeah, that would
Mhm.
help.
Yeah, that would help a lot.
For sure.
So,
So whoever did your graphics, nice job. You cut Montana off east of Miles City.
no, I did. On which page?
I think our new logo leaves that open-ended.
it
Yeah, that's kind of scrunched
is.
I can't profess to be an expert at this stuff. I spend more time fighting with it, and finally I have to ask somebody else.
Yeah.
So,
Are there any further questions? This gentleman? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Another year's in the books.
Another trip to Montana.
That's right.
So we need a motion to adopt the 2018 July 1st actuarial valuation.
To adopt the valuation level.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. We had 9:45 break, but we are well ahead, so let's just move on, if you don't mind, to the administrative business. Would that be okay? Oh, we did not. Let's let's have some public comment on the actuarial evaluation. Thanks.
Good, you're good?
You good?
I'm good, thank you.
Did you get what you needed today?
I have some questions, but I'll talk with Sean after, when I can see the full
Wait,
report.
Okay, I was gonna say, if you'd like to ask these gentlemen there, they're the experts too.
Are you okay with that?
Totally okay with that. That's
Well-
what they're here for.
Okay, well, yesterday with PERS, you talked about the normal, entry rate normal cost and the split between the normal cost of the current employees and then the future.
Right.
So in your chart, your normal cost, because this is a snapshot, is that just the normal cost of everybody in the plan today?
That's only in the plan today.
Okay.
That's right. So that's the one thing about a projection that would show is because there is a new tier in this plan that has a lower cost. So as you replace that population with new hires, the cost to fund their benefits slightly less, but you're still collecting the same percentages of the payroll. So it puts more money towards amortizing the unfunded liability.
Okay. And then one of your slides, the bar graph, the gains and losses,
Mhm.
the top.
That was the assumption
that-
change.
That was the total impact?
Yes, it was
That-
$209 million, increased the unfunded by that $209 million.
Of all the assumption changes?
All the assumptions changed, so the discount rate, the mortality rates, the salary scale, the termination rates, all of them together.
Okay, because the rest of the bars were some of those assumptions, but not all of them.
Well, that was the experience based on the old assumptions. So, like, we expect to earn 7.75% on an actuarial basis, but they only earn 6.86, and so there was a loss on the investment side. So next year, when we come back, that gain and loss table will be based on 7.5%. So how did you perform compared to 7.5?
Okay. So when I do a summary for the legislature and I say what the assumptions are, I'm going to use the 7.75% investment
No,
assumption for this valuation?
Uh,
No?
No, because the liabilities are measured at 7.5.
Okay.
So, but asset performance, gain or loss, was based on the
For the
prior,
back.
yeah.
Okay, yep. Let's see. Oh, and is the smoothing, just to clarify, is the smoothing over 4 years?
4 years,
Okay.
yep.
All right, thank you.
That's it?
That's it.
Sorry about that. Anybody else?
Short break.
Okay, yeah, we're just gonna quickly take a short break to see if we can get you these, the report here. Right? Have a safe trip home, you guys.
Thank you.
See ya.
Yeah, have a great day. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It was nice to meet you.
How many actuarial exams have you taken?
I got the, so I guess there's
Thank you. All right, let's call the meeting back to order. We'll move on to our administrative business and the investment report.
Since we last met, the Board of Investments did hire a new executive director, that would be Dan Villa. He was the budget director for the government, since the last director, David Hewlett. I think he's going to work out well. This is his first week on the job. We met on Tuesday, and he'd been spending his time actually talking to staff, just trying to get to know things. Also along those lines, during the process of interviews and hiring, Jerry Burton, the deputy director, announced that she would be retiring as well. And she's retiring in December, early December. And, good news, bad news, certainly she's got a lot of experience and hate to lose her. The good news is, kind of with these changes, this would be an opportunity to make any adjustments that they felt should have been coming in the years, whether it's different assignments or changing a little bit of job descriptions. So a new start for a lot of reasons. And there are actually several others who have taken different jobs. So there's going to be a bit of a changeover there, but the CIO is still there, and the core of the investment individuals are still going to be there, so maybe a little bit more sleek business style when it comes to moving the materials through the office. I think it'll be a good opportunity. I think they'll fit well. Keep doing a good job. Other news that affects us, we were talking about properties that were owned and in the cap now, but in the pool for the retirements. We did talk about the values of those, and they will be transferred to the trust fund probably by November. And the as-is value that was stated in the materials that I showed you 3 months ago or whatever it was, is the value of cash that will come from that trust into the cap, into the pension trust fund. And we should be able to return then equal or greater value that we were getting from those buildings. So the state isn't going to sell them at this point, but it is going to be in the trust funds instead of the retirement funds. And if memory serves me, that's about $19 million for all of those properties, so that value will be transferred over into cap to continue to earn interest.
It's still in a real estate category, most likely, right?
In the trust fund, I think they divided it into the same categories in the real estate, but it's
Cash that comes in to the cap, I would imagine, in order to keep their allocation the same, they'll reinvest that same money in different real estate.
it'll be reinvested. I can't say exactly how much it is. We have ranges, and so they'll try and keep within those ranges, but if there's other opportunities for other things, whether it be private equity or something else, that's where the investment would be. So, yeah, we couldn't say for sure that 19 million definitely is possible. In August, found some interesting data that Joe Cullen, the CIO, gave us, just kind of an annual report looking at pension funds. And public employees over a 24-year period, it shows 7.74 return, teachers 7.76. The rest of them are anywhere from 7.4 to 7.6 since inception date. Most of that variability came from the past where they weren't all in the same pool. And then looking at a one-year return, they're all within a couple of hundredths of a percent, and the difference really is based on the amount that is in STIP, not cash, that's in STIP. Some, like the judges, really don't have much of a cash need. They're over 100% funded. Looking at the net cash need, a one-year projection for all pensions and not just teachers' retirement showed $324 million as a net cash need. That comes from interest and earnings, of course. That's just above what we're contributing. It's about 3% net cash need, which is still pretty low for mature funds. Net change in asset value, according to BOI for teachers, was just under $200 million last year, 196.8, which is good. Within the cap fund, he showed us a breakdown of percentage of increases in each of the different categories. I found it interesting that cash actually had a 1.5% return for the year. My cash surely isn't doing that.
No.
So that was, I thought, positive. The only negative values for last year for a one-year return was in treasuries and investment grade credit. treasuries were 0.7% negative, and the investment grade credit was 0.3, mostly because of the increases in the interest rates. And then the two big returners, of course, was domestic equity and private equity, 14.8% and 15.6%. Each individually, as a whole, again, the pension plans, consolidated pension plans, at a 9% rate as a whole. And domestic equities, of course, contributed the most to that increase.
Jeff, was that a fiscal year?
This one ending in July.
Yeah.
Yeah, July to July 1st.
And then if you're interested, I thought this chart showing internal, external percentages as well as passive and active for each of the asset classes was interesting. Happy to let you look at it if you'd like. In the domestic equity and international equity, they're both at about half and half for passive active, which I thought was kind of interesting. And 100% external for each of those for managers of those action assets.
Have they done much by way of evaluating the contrast in net return between those classes going back to when they started?
Yeah, kind of continually on an annual basis, they look at each of those. And it seems to be that
Have they drawn any conclusions yet?
there isn't a whole lot of difference so far between them. It's not appreciable differences. So both the external and internal rates are similar. Mostly the internal is, where they do it is better because of the fees. I mean, internally the fees are really low compared to having an external manager. And the passive active, they really don't see the difference, to speak of. But you guys can look at that if you like. And then in your packets, you have the summaries that Sean sent. I think it's within this section. And I did pass around the crib sheet, but it's the latest one I have. It was July 31st. It does show increases in that, but looking at this summary,
It's on page 16 and 17 of your packet is the VOI snapshot of it.
yeah. Looking at the top, the 4 billion, that's $31 million over the July numbers. So an overall $30.5 million consolidated pool increase in that 1 month. I would note at the bottom of that first page, all positives in those 1 month, 3 month, and year to date, all better than from July for sure. And the CAP consolidated plan benchmark since inception, that's at the bottom of that first page, 10.85. That is literally 1 year of CAP. It's the only year that in existence. And shows 8.93 for inception since date. And that's, again, that's kind of a hybrid. Since we went to CAP, it's not exactly the same as it was previous to that. That's a good comparison. The next page, you can see international equity over the month was a loss. Again, not unanticipated with things going on in the world. Third page, I've noted that the 1 month returns are all positive, where most of those tips, all the way down to mortgage-backed securities, those were all negative the previous month. And so they moved in the right direction as well. And that's my report.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
we have Nolan next, our financial statements and budget report.
Looks like we all got the memo.
Blue jacket.
Well, now that you mention it,
Really big shirt.
So I'm starting on page 20 with the financials here, and I have a couple things highlighted just because we made some changes of how we were projecting the security gains. I was a little bit over projecting in years previous, because if you remember right, a while back, we made the change that on these investments that BOI has decided not to make their entries into the Savers financials. So, except for once a year at the end of the year. So, because of that, we try to give you a better picture by estimating what those gains or losses are going to be, based on the financial report that you just looked at, that Member Greenfield went over. And so, based on that, last year you can see we hadn't made that decision yet, so it still showed like a 0 securities gains at 8/31/17, whereas this year the projected amount is about 60 million that we've earned from 6/30 to 8/31, so in the 2 months, the securities gains is projected at that. And then on top of that, BOI has actually recorded some appreciation this year of 60 million, which last year it looks like there was a recorded amount of negative 16,000. So, those two are going to show a large difference in the total investment revenue of 120 million so far this year versus last year of just a small investment revenue. So that's going to be a pretty big difference in year-to-date numbers, because that 119 million carries over to page 21 in the investment revenue. So our total revenue is much higher than the previous year, because you can see the contributions are virtually the same year over year. So those, I just wanted to point that out, because it's what that does is give you a pretty large revenue over expenses as of 8/31 versus 8/31 of last year, where we had a $30 million loss of revenue over expenses. And again, these are all projected numbers, that we're using, based on the investment reports that we get from Board of Investments. So with those numbers, we can see that the total assets are about $4.26 billion as of 8/31. So is there any questions on that?
So a year from now, we'll have apples to apples.
Yeah, and actually less than that, because I think we started doing that projection sometime in the middle of last fiscal year. I'd have to look and see when it is, but it might be by next board meeting. I could probably get those. We'll just need to go back further than that. But yeah, it'll be a lot. Yeah, it'll be soon. I don't want to commit to.
A bunch of work.
The $500,000 decrease in contributions, is that just for the teachers?
It probably actually has a lot more to do with just the timing of wages and contribution reports coming in. Maybe Billings or one of the bigger schools last year turned in their August report.
Okay.
By the time and this year they didn't. We have a set that, the wage and contribution reports are due by the 15th of the following month, but schools vary on, it's not like each school does it on the same day every month. They kind of It just
I mean, it's
depends
not
on how
a
they're.
huge
No.
percent of those numbers.
And so that's
but-
definitely just gonna be like a timing thing.
Right.
You'd expect the contributions, you know, every year to go up a little bit, but
Right, that's.
as far as, you know, as of a certain date, it could be, give or take, you know, so.
Nolan, when you say you're doing projections based on the Board of Investment reports, are you taking their average return over the last year, 5 years, 10 years, or how do you do that?
So actually what I'm doing, if you go back and look at the investment report, you can see the market value on the very top of page 16. The market value of $2.34 billion. That's as of August 31st, and then we have a number, that same market value as of 6/30 of 18. So I'm basically taking the difference between, you know, what's happened since 6/30.
And what that percentage is, and then.
Not so much the percentage, just that total amount of here's the market value.
Okay.
And then we've already recorded this 60, or, you know, Board of Investments has already recorded. So say that number was $120 million.
Right.
That difference. Well, Board of Investments has already recorded the 60 million, so I'm taking that out. And then the other 60 million is kind of, we're putting it in as like securities gain.
It's more of an estimate, it's not a
Yeah,
projection, it's an estimate.
Yeah, exactly, it's more of an estimate. I probably misspoke on saying projection, so.
No problem.
Yeah, because it's all based on what's already happened.
Yeah.
But we don't know the exact amount for
Right.
for entry.
So they used to just actually record those values, even though they, you know, when I say they, Board of Investments recorded those values, but they were estimates too, because they kind of, you know, made everything correct, you know, at the end of the fiscal year, and had to do some adjustments and stuff. Well, now they're just waiting till the end of the fiscal year to make that one entry into Savers, and that's where all these numbers come from, is the, you know, the Savers system, so in order to show you a more accurate, or we hope more accurate picture, we have to use those estimates, whereas in the past we didn't have to, because they were already recorded in there, yeah.
So when we look forward a year and we compare your estimates with the actual results, by what percentage could you be off without us giving you a hard time?
Plus or minus one.
Go with big
Yeah,
number.
we'll just have to see. I don't know. That was one reason, like, we went, what we had been doing was incorrect, and I, you know, caught it recently. I wasn't subtracting out that investment appreciation amount out of, so it was like kind of doubling up. So I was showing you an inaccurate picture in like a previous board meetings, and then based on these estimates, so then, you know, we made that correction. And hopefully going forward, these are a lot more accurate. Again, it's, like I said, an estimate, so you're gonna, I hope it's not.
He asked you where to set the bar, you could have
Yeah.
said within 20%.
Yeah. Be good.
Plus or minus.
Yeah, as volatile as the market is, you never know. Percent might not be. Is there any other questions on the balance sheet, financials? After 2 months of the fiscal year, it's very tough to project the budget, you know, and where we're gonna be at as far as a surplus or deficit. You know, at this point, we haven't had a lot of expenditures, especially in that first month of July is very few actual fiscal year 19 expenditures come in and actually get recorded, so it's tough to project right now, so I would expect to have a surplus. We do have the personal services is probably the easiest one to project, and we've had some vacancy savings with, you Burton's position being open and Kim's, and so that's a little more accurate than some of the operating expenses, but I would definitely project a surplus at this point, so. In trust budget, hasn't changed too much. These are all the new numbers based on the last board meeting with all the approved, budget amendment to the Entrust Phase 3 project. So that's how the overall budget looks with that amendment and the projections. So still projected surplus as long as the project finishes, on time and stuff, so.
And it is, just an update on the schedule, it is staying right on schedule through this point, so.
Cool. And then other than that, not much, 25 and 26 are there, just kind of information. There's the delinquent agency report. We, as of for July, there's just a lot of schools that don't even, do a report in July, a lot of smaller schools and stuff. So I expect to see that, some reports in the future on delinquent agencies, but as of right now, there is.
Unrelated to that, for PBRS during the summer, do schools send regular reports? It's clear that they have those members working, and not necessarily TRS members working.
I believe so, and PERS actually, I think, requires their employers to report to everybody, even if they are TRS members, so, yeah.
And so
But
our potential bill to change that a little bit for us would go right in line with what they are.
Yes, yeah, they're,
So it's
yes.
not like an extra report, they would just send it.
Well, it's,
That's one way
right,
to look at it.
and we'll have it built into where if they're not gonna have any TRS members reported, like say in the month of July and August, when they come in to do that, their last report of the year, they're gonna be able to real easily and efficiently mark that, a couple of $0 reports right at that time. It's not like they have to come back a month later and go do the $0. Yeah, so it shouldn't be any big onus on the employers. Yeah.
One way to sell it, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
From what I understand, the way we anticipate it working is they log in and there'll be a button that kind of says, no report this month, and then it's like, are you sure that you're basically acknowledging that there's no report this month, and then, yes, I'm sure, and that it submits the $0 report. But that's just a way for me to know, okay, that employer doesn't have a report. Because right now, it's only a couple months out of the year, but it's kind of a guessing game. I mean, you have to make a lot of phone calls in order to figure out. And some of those small schools, there's nobody there to answer the phone.
True.
So the ones that are pushing the old report, the ones you're not gonna get.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Nolan. Denise.
Madam Chair, members of the board. I should do this report in August because now in October it feels like 100 years ago since I attended Napa. But, so, I think I told you a couple of years ago that with the changeover of administration at Napa, their original president and administrative staff had all retired, been replaced, and they moved the headquarters of the Napa organization, and that I thought the quality of the conference had dropped off a little bit, but they seem to be back to their usual standards at this point. It was a very good conference this year. So I'll start with Lee Snell first, because some of you have heard from him or will hear from him shortly as well. His prediction in the last week of June was that we were going to see an increase in defined benefit pension, unfavorable reporting, commentary, that sort of thing, starting with the Moody's pension debt study that was released, and their prognosis that their statement that in 1995 a portfolio intended to achieve 7.5% return could have been almost completely bonds, invested almost completely in bonds, and that now it would have to almost completely be invested in riskier equities and in emerging markets and private equity, which I don't think anybody really believes is entirely accurate, but that's the story being pushed. I would say that I have seen, according, in line with Mr. Snell's prediction, I have been seeing a number of defined benefit pension, public pension, unfavorable articles and that in national publications recently, one entitled "The Defined Benefit Public Pension Party Needs to End," just about a month ago. So I think he's right. I think and he indicated that following the midterm elections that we would probably see a renewed effort to get PEPTA attached to some no risk of failure federal legislation. So it's Devin Muniz's bill that would require market value of liabilities reporting for public pensions. Does a number of other things as well that are.
You can make the investment, the biggest thing about it is the investment gains can possibly be essentially taxable immediately instead of right now we're
Instead of tax.
yes. It's a big piece of it.
And that has yet to have a vote in the House?
It hasn't been, it was introduced a few years back as part of the Puerto Rico and it was dropped from that bill, the Puerto Rico funding bill. It hasn't been reattached, it hasn't been reintroduced or attached to anything yet, but he's not given up on it. And again, after the midterm elections, the prediction is we will probably, depending on how the election goes, in all likelihood, we will probably see that again.
Yeah, and that's been the prediction for
Yeah.
for the last 2 years, is that we think it may show up again. He attempts to get it on the bills every so often, and very recently he just tried and it didn't end up on, I can't remember which bill, but there was one just recently passed that didn't have it.
And actually, I think it's going on more than that.
Yeah.
They're just waiting for the political wind to shift a little farther.
Taxable to the members?
Well, to the plan.
plan.
Yeah. Which is, my plot.
But, well, and
And at what rate?
it can't be taxable to a public plan because we're sovereign governments and we're not taxable at the federal level, but it would potentially tax member contributions to the plan and the accrual of their benefits as if we were not a federally tax qualified plan. So the accrual of the benefit each year, the value of their benefit would potentially be taxable. Yeah, it will by and large do away with, but, it has to pass, so. On the other side of the federal legislation issue, there is no prediction that any of the pending regulations, normal retirement age, definition of governmental plans, will be seen anytime soon. We've had some IRS commentary on, for example, public charter schools and whether or not they're governmental eligible plans under IRS law, but they don't expect those things to be finalized anytime soon, if ever, at least right now. They do predict that there will likely be an increase in federal audits of retirement systems, just because that is an area that they have defunded less than they have defunded the regulatory efforts of the IRS. So, and they are starting to see some of those still remaining primarily at university level systems. Another big topic, again, of course, was cybersecurity. There are getting to be more and more resources for sharing of threat data and that sort of thing for public retirement systems. The strong recommendation is that we look into those, that we participate in those. There are no off-the-shelf data analysis programs that are very good or very valid for looking at data trends or online activity or that sort of thing and telling you whether you have a fraud problem. It really requires internal knowledge of where your threat points are and internal human looking at your data elements, which of course is all we've talked about before, all part of our anticipation for our security plan going forward. They gave a number of good recommendations of things you need to look at, certainly based on recent history. You have to look at whether or not you have multiple accounts tied to a single bank account. So with the Iowa incident where they went out and created online accounts for several hundred members of the system and then made withdrawals of their account balances, etc. Those are the kinds of things. The incidents are increasing, the attempts are increasing for public pension plans, and those are the things that we have to primarily be looking at. Colorado Para has determined to deal with the what-ifs from a legal perspective, because it's very hard to stop the threat. How do you deal with it once it happens? Looking at cybersecurity levels, does cybersecurity coverage, insurance levels, does the insurance cover your vendors? We're in an unusual, I shouldn't say we're in an unusual, a lot of states are like us, but there are a number of plans like Colorado Para who purchase their own cybersecurity coverage. We're covered for cybersecurity through the state's tort defense and risk coverage. We have $2 million per incident coverage as the state cybersecurity coverage. The average cost of a cybersecurity response is $15 million for a public pension plan, regardless of the size of the attack. So, other than the security coverage that the state purchases, of course, the state self-funds their insurance risk. So, they also discussed the death searches, the difficulty that a lot of plans have in obtaining up-to-date information on deaths of participants.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt?
Okay, sure.
I'm thinking about that last statement you just made. Before we move on, have we considered at all whether or not it might be appropriate to get supplemental insurance?
So, interesting that you should ask that question. You always go to risk management to ask those kinds of things, and here's sort of why. From a legal perspective, if the state self-funds and if the state has statutory limitations of liability, which the state of Montana does, if you go out and purchase additional insurance coverage on your own, you may be legally found to have waived that limitation of liability that's set forth in statute. So we've sort of had the same conversation previously with fiduciary coverage insurance and that as well, and that it is not recommended by risk management that we need to buy additional coverage, and from a legal perspective, it's not recommended that we do that because of the potential waiver of limitations of liability in statute.
So we have the external $2 million policy, right? And then when you say the state's self-funded, if we, let's say TRS were to have a breach, it was a $10 million bill, would the self-funding portion come from the state? They're gonna pay the other $8 million?
Your guess is as good as mine.
I mean, I think for most agencies that would be the case. For us, I don't know.
Being unappropriated and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, if the answer to that question were, sorry, Scott, if the answer to that question were no, I don't know if there's some way we can get to the bottom of the answer to that question, but if it were no, and then they take the position that we lose the possibility of having their $2 million of inadequate coverage if we go to get our own, is completely irrational. And it just leaves us completely wide open and vulnerable, it would seem to me.
Well, and maybe I'm missing something here, but it seems to me like there should be a discussion of what that money is. Is that money a replacement for loss, or is that money a liability concern? And if it's a liability concern, then maybe the state side of things covers stuff. But if we have nothing to help us with the loss, then it seems like we need to be talking about that and how we're going to deal with that.
And the unfortunate thing is that the whether or not it's a waiver of liability is not a position the state takes. It's decisions that have been made in courts on whether or not you can impose your statutory limitations on liability if you've gone out and purchased coverage. And does that purchase of coverage constitute a statement on your part that that limitation of liability no longer applies because you are accommodating the risk by purchasing insurance coverage? Then whether or not you've purchased enough is your problem, but that doesn't change the analysis
What does
that,
that limitation of liability mean? Does that mean if our members are out a certain amount of money, the state says we're not liable for it after point X?
yes,
They're on their own?
essentially
And
that's
we're gonna leave
the
it hanging?
case. States as government, states are immune from lawsuit unless they say otherwise. And Montana has statutes that say otherwise. The state, I believe constitutionally, is able to be sued for damages that it causes. But in statute then, there are limitations on what the state can be required to
Is
pay.
it a dollar amount in statute?
It is, yes, and I'm sorry, I can't tell you right now what it is, but we can, I mean, we certainly can have that conversation. The good thing about it is that cybersecurity coverage is getting to be more and more common and more affordable. So it's entirely possible that the state will up its cybersecurity coverage limits, and you know, maybe we need to be a party to encouraging them to do so.
Is it not true also that the current M-Trust construct of that software, through preventative measures, is working hard to give us a lower liability because it's harder to infiltrate?
Well, I mean, we're certainly doing what we can. I don't know that it's any harder to infiltrate than any other, you know, outward-facing web accessible system. There's only so much you can do, and we're doing everything that we can. But I think if you're really targeted, you know, obviously, I mean, we have some of the highest ranking offices in federal government actually can be hacked if they're targeted. So I think.
But even most of those targeting attempts are not necessarily people that are using the back, the people that are using the front door. It's agencies, and that's where the federal government comes into play. It's agencies that are inappropriately managing their own security or leaving the door open that are creating the liability, as opposed to somebody figuring out where the back door is. So it's somebody that left out a password, or somebody that's got something on a computer, or somebody that's maybe got permission for security rights to things that they shouldn't have. So it's more that kind of thing that I think is the risk than it is somebody from Nigeria hacking your system.
And, you know, one of the biggest issues is that systems are going, and fortunately for us, because we're a little behind most bigger systems in making online transactions available, online withdrawals, online retirement applications, those sorts of things. Those have actually been the big hits for public pension plans in other states, is people figuring out how to manipulate online transactions with the system in order to withdraw people's account balances, et cetera. So, the recommendation is that you not go to a fully online transaction environment. A lot of systems that have done that in the past are now sort of backing up a little bit and adding more human interaction to the process, more, hard copy documentation being required as a part of the online transaction process, that sort of thing. So in that respect, we're just starting to build those things, so we're certainly keeping all of that in mind as we go along. So I'm sorry, I mean, we can,
So if I remember right, we looked at all of this not all that long ago as far as the insurance, what the state covers, all of that. So I think we should be able to dust that off.
Yep.
And my impression was that since it's self-insured, the state would kick in, but I don't
Yes.
know exactly for
Right.
what.
right. Well, and the other thing with them kicking in, of course, is that we are largely dependent on state ITSD for a large portion of our security capabilities in any case,
Yes.
so.
We are dependent.
But that's also the scary part, because they take over those things. It's kind of like when you start a little war somewhere with the state of Texas, the United States comes in with all of their stuff. Well, that's what happens with IT, and pretty soon Texas has no control over what's going to happen in that war. Somebody else is making all the decisions, and so your loss is going to be as a result of things you should control.
Yeah.
So there was also conversation about death searches again, and now, a couple of years back, the big problem was that public pension plans had lost access to the IRS's death master file to determine whether, to keep up to date on deaths of members, et cetera. Well, now apparently the IRS death master file, it only has about 50% or less of contemporary death records. And my recollection is by contemporary death records, they were talking within the last 90 days. So there actually are some some other service providers that collect the information directly from the individual jurisdictions that are far more up to date. And I think that we actually are contracted with one of those service providers that is counted as doing a very good job at aggregating the information from the most possible jurisdictions. Obtaining certification to access the death master file costs $15,000 a year. And so, while we had talked previously about potentially doing that, at this point, given the level of contemporary data that they have, I mean, it certainly wouldn't be worth it. So we seem to be doing quite well.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had a lot of late fines of deceased members where huge amounts of benefits have been paid out, so.
Yeah, and that vendor's PEI is the name of the vendor that we use for death audits or death searches, and more and more of the other systems across country are starting to use them. So.
There was a substantial conversation about trusts as beneficiaries. Suffice to say, we'll talk about that more when we talk about our legislative proposals, but our legislation proposal to clean up our beneficiary designation processes and requirements is entirely in line with the best practice recommendations for trusts as beneficiaries. So if you have any questions about that, we can talk about that at that time. The other big issue was the discontinuation of the tax qualification letter program and what that meant for public pension plans. So the best practice recommendation now is you need to have a fairly robust self-audit program. A lot of, including our outside tax counsel, Ice Miller, now are pushing their services as periodic reviewers where you get a legal opinion letter of your tax qualified status. We've not talked about whether that's something, but at this point, I mean, certainly since our last tax qualification, determination from the IRS, we've not made substantial changes to statute or that would have any impact on our tax qualification status. Certainly, if those kinds of things came along, we would talk about how we would cover the tax qualification status, but, there was also conversation about the required minimum distribution requirements and the difficulty of finding dormant members or lost members. We've also, implemented a substantial program to prevent us from losing members as time goes by. So I think we are in good standing with respect to those best practice recommendations as well. So, is there any questions? That was sort of, yeah.
So what are we doing to prevent losing them?
We have created and will build into M-Trust and when we talk about the legislation proposal as well, you will see in there, in the membership section, there is now a sort of enhanced definition of what it means to be an active member, when you hit active member status, and then following active member status when you become dormant. Along with those definitional changes will be a robust communication letter process where people, when they've terminated, as far as we're concerned, when they haven't been reported to the system for 180 days, a letter is sent to them. For the 7 years subsequent, a letter will be sent to them along with withdrawal applications if they're term non-vested. Our efforts will absolutely be to get people to withdraw their funds when it's clear that they are no longer going to participate in TRS and be done with it up front, rather than trying to find them when they're close to age 70 and a half. So we will be enhancing those practices to get people out of the system sooner rather than
When they
later.
quit teaching, for example,
Right.
not retire. Okay.
It should help, certainly, in the final letter out of that 7-year letters is a certified letter, so we'll know whether it's getting to them or not. I mean, there's still gonna be some that if they, once they terminate in Montana, they take off and there's gonna be some we still just can't find, and they'll end up going to dormant.
And every once in a while, we have one who, we do find, we know they're receiving the communications, they just don't respond.
Yeah.
So, the dormant status will now be a more defined kind of thing as well. And if they haven't heeded our recommendations and done what they needed to
Is
do.
there a way for, because I don't want to speak for the financial side of things, but is there a way for them to let us know that they're not interested in taking their money and they just want to sit there? In part because I know there are times when, especially in a young person's time in the career,
Right.
where 10 years from now, they might become a member of a state retirement system or whatever, and be able to take advantage of money that's in there in our system.
A little bit different for term vested versus term non-vested members, so.
Well, clearly vested is a different story. I'm
Right.
talking about people that maybe have 4 years in, for example, and what they might lose if they take it out versus what they might gain
Well,
if they stay in. for-
keep in mind that they always have the option of rolling over to another eligible plan, or including an individual.
But I guess that's the
retirement
reason
account.
why I'm asking, is there a way for them to tell us that
We-
they
no.
want to just wait?
Other than simply not taking their money out, no, there is not. And I guess that would be sort of a policy conversation about whether or not that would be something we would want to encourage term non-vested people to be able to do, as opposed to rolling over to another eligible plan.
Well,
So most do that.
but obviously,
There's
if they're rolling over, they understand what's going on, and we know what's going on. I'm talking more about just being able to maintain communications with somebody that doesn't want to take their money out, and might not take their money out for 20 years.
Right.
For
Well, so
logical reasons.
in the letter, it doesn't say they're required to take it out.
Yeah.
It lets them
No, I
know.
get that, but it'd be nice if there was something that told us that they understand what's going on, and that they've told us that that's okay.
It would, yes, it would be nice.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
we have people that should be receiving a 40-year benefit that don't return a retirement application.
Well, no,
Yeah,
I know there are
it's
those.
the non-vested, right.
It's more the young people that don't really have a mind for retirement at that point in time. Like, 50-year-olds don't have a mind for retirement, but, you know, there are some people that actually do things the way they do it.
Yeah, and so even, let's say in your example, you have someone with 4 years and they move out of state and they're sort of trying to figure out what they want to do. Even if we get to a point where that goes dormant, at any point in the future, when they come back to us, whether it's to roll it out to another state or they come back to Montana, I mean, we reactivate that account and give them all the credit for interest they would have earned otherwise. So it's like nothing really ever happens to it. But it gives us a process for the requirement of distributions to where in statute, we're gonna say, we've been trying to find this person for 7 years, we're unable to find them, we're moving them dormant, now it's completely on them, we're not going to go searching for them anymore. It's kind of what we're trying to get to.
Well, and I understand. I guess what I'm thinking of is voluntary dormant or whatever, just so that you don't have to continue to spend resources to get an answer that you're not gonna get because you maybe
Yeah,
didn't
I
give them an
see.
opportunity to tell you.
And so,
And here's, let me give you an example as to where I'm coming from. We have lots of young people that one, you know, that both sides of the relationship are tied to the system somehow. And one of them, for whatever reason, they have a child or whatever, stops. But they stop when they have a child, they don't stop vested because that isn't how their life works. So in many scenarios then, life happens, and when they have conversations with people, well, should I leave that money there, or should I take that money? Well, the intent was that they would never stay out entirely to begin with. But when they think they need to do something, a lot of times they do, and then they have to find ways to build that back.
right, so when somebody has not been reported to us for 180 consecutive days, we send them a letter. And the letter is being revised, but the letter is very communicative with respect to, you can leave your money on account. And if you go back to work in a TRS reportable position, return to active member status, then your account will continue to grow. If you don't go back to work in a TRS reportable position, there's no reason for you to leave your money on account with TRS because it will only earn nominal interest. So you should think about rolling it over to an account. Now, can they respond?
No, but in many of those scenarios, they don't have an account to roll it over to.
Right, well,
They're at home working with their children, they're not gonna be back in a scenario where they can do something for 10 years.
right.
I don't think we can be everybody's keeper.
I'm not saying we should be, I'm just talking
Yeah.
about, are there logical things that tell us that it's not a matter of whether or not they're doing their thing, it's a matter of whether or not we're gonna continue to spend resources to make those connections that we don't even make.
So-
I get that, but how can you make somebody respond?
We don't.
Even if you give
can't
them-
make them.
Right. And I think that's what they're getting at. Even if there's a place here that says, you know, here are your options, please let me know what you're doing. I mean, what more can you do?
And those series of communications for 7 years from the 180-day letter, it appears you're terminated, no longer working in a TRS reportable position, you know, here are your options. And it will tell them clearly up front what dormancy means. But they don't go dormant until after 7 years. But it will clearly tell them, and as Sean said, a certified letter will go before they go dormant, that at the point you hit dormancy, we're not communicating with you any longer. At that point, your money is still here, you're still entitled to have it back, but we're not going to continue to try to communicate with you or find you or otherwise. After you go dormant, if you've not done something with your account, it's on you to come back and claim your funds from the retirement system. Because otherwise, then we end up with people who turn non-vested, haven't communicated with us for many years, and all of a sudden we're at age 70 and a half, and IRS says we should be doing something with those people. So, yeah, I understand, and we have exactly the same concern, we are trying.
And I'm, maybe this is a discussion for a different time, but I literally visit with people on a regular basis that say things like, if I would have known that taking my money out of TRS, and that's the term that's used, taking my money out of TRS was a bad thing for me financially, I'd have never done it. Well, if you had a financial planner helping you with some of these decisions, you wouldn't have that problem. But part of it is also the communications sometimes occur from agencies, and I'm not picking on us at all, but from agencies that speak in a language like you should roll your money over. And so it almost sounds like we're encouraging them to do that when in fact maybe they don't have a logical way to do it, or a logical process to do it. And so
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we're as user-friendly as we are
Right.
agency-friendly when we're doing this stuff.
So I would absolutely say that as we finalize the letters for this process and that, if you want to see them and comment on, but I will say, and I'm sure Sean and Tammy would confirm for you, that the whole initiative of this new letter process to dormancy or whatever is intended to be plain language, and one of the enhancements that we've made, even in the statute, is to make absolutely clear to people what the repercussions are of withdrawing from the retirement system. You lose your status as a Tier 1 member. If that's what you are, you're going to have to repurchase that service at a much higher cost in all likelihood than just depositing the contributions that you withdrew from the retirement system. We want people to understand, if they take their money out of TRS, that they are potentially giving up, a tremendous amount. So if you intend to come back to work for TRS, think long and hard about whether or not you withdraw from the system in the interim. But frankly, when somebody has not participated in TRS for 7 years, the likelihood that they're going to come back as a active member is much, much lower than, so, yeah, I mean, we're
It's low,
trying
but-
to.
But possible.
Yeah.
And the letters, even the letters we use today, I mean, they let them know, they're welcome to leave their money on account with
Right.
TRS. And the ones that we do for this 7-year process will also say that up until
Right.
they hit age 7, the year they hit
Yeah.
7.5. At that point, we have to do something. And we're trying to build we're trying to set this process up so that we can comply with that IRS requirement. Because right now, it's, for term non-vested members, there are some that should have received their money and they haven't yet, but they also would very much likely, had we had this process in place, would be garnered by now. And at that point, they can still come and ask for their money, but we're not looking for it.
Well, and I can understand that entirely, and I think that makes perfect sense. I was looking out for that one.
Yeah, no, I think you have a valid concern for sure.
Is it year for year credit to go from a TRS member to PRS? Or is it a buy difference or something? And if so, you guys mentioned that in the letter, that whether you go after TRS or any state agency, those years count toward that retirement plan?
So in Montana, they would count, and a straight transfer, I know coming from PRS to TRS, it's exactly what it is at PERS is what they get credit for in TRS. On a straight transfer from TRS to PERS, do they convert that, or is it?
They can, yeah, it's not a one-for-one, because
Yeah,
we,
that's what I thought.
we're
It's
9
9
months,
months.
school district employee, and they're a 12-month.
But it's still service credit.
Yeah.
I mean,
Does that mention in the letter too, when you come back to TRS or any other Montana state agency, that you're giving up something?
So the whole concept of rolling, so if they were over, they had.
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
speaking of
that's
his
really
example
what
where they're
that
out of,
is.
the workplace for a number of years potentially, and they're gonna come back and do something later. Here's what you're giving up if you ever wanna work for TRS again or some other state agency, you're giving up these years of service.
We don't
The
mention
letters
it in the letters, we don't mention
say
anything
certain.
currently about transfer, the reciprocity agreement between the two systems. I mean, they can still purchase that service over at PERS even if they refunded with us, of course.
Expensive, yeah.
Yeah, that's a higher cost for them, of course. just like
Those
it
are
is
the
if they return
conversations we
here.
have with clients when they
Yeah.
come in and ask, what should I do with this?
Well, this
So
is
there
classic.
any chance you will ever go back? If so, you gotta leave
Yeah,
it
you should
there.
leave,
Yeah.
right.
Truly, the reason why you should work with somebody on the financial side of things to actually plan your future out is tied to all this, but we just know that I'm just worried about the person that's 30 or 35 or younger, and, that concept just has not.
Right. Well, the hopes of us, continually trying to communicate to them is that they will contact us, and ask those questions,
It's an outdated
Yeah.
system for them to be able to continue to change their address.
Yeah,
If they
Yeah.
understand this, they can continue to do that until they're 70 and a half and will know where to send it.
yeah.
Right.
The point is they have to participate in actually answering something somehow.
Yeah, I mean, and always, when we receive a call about, usually they're trying to get their money right away, they wanna withdraw, they're done. And then one of the first things, those calls go to the front desk when they go downstairs to all the staff, do you have any plans to work in a TRS position again in the future? Because if you do, and then we inform them, you're likely better off to be here, but if you're currently unemployed, as far as TRS employment goes, and you don't plan to come back within the next 60 days, then you're allowed to withdraw. So, yeah, it is a tough issue, and it's an issue that it would be nice to just say, yeah, they can leave it here, we're not gonna worry about it, but the problem is when we get to when they hit 70 and a half, and we have no idea how to find them, then all of a sudden, we're not in compliance with the IRS requirement. That's kind of a bigger problem than we just can't ignore that.
Well, yeah, I don't want to suggest that we should ignore that at all.
But I think hopefully this new process, Scott, will alleviate a lot of your concerns, because right now, we don't have that in place. I mean, although we do address and send out letters, but Denise is drafting, making changes to those letters that we're gonna be sending out repetitively, some different version of it over the 7 years until they get the certified letters, and hopefully.
And it absolutely communicates if you plan to come back to work with TRS, leave your money on account. I mean, we are very definite about communicating to people what you give up if you withdraw.
How many people are we talking about?
Hmm?
How many people are we talking about as far as?
Dormant people. I mean, well, the board made a decision, I don't know how many years ago, it's been a long, long time ago, where we set a threshold of $1,000 and we moved a ton of accounts at that point in time to dormant status. I get a lot of people today that, come back and we have a reversal process, which was a board decision that we wanted to have that in place, that if they came back and made claim to it, we reverse them. The number of folks that are currently dormant, off the top of my head, I mean, it's
Rough guess.
there are a couple of thousand, probably, yeah.
And we have a lot more than that of term non-vested
Invested that we
people
haven't addressed.
who are not dormant.
Yeah.
So, in total, right now, there's almost 14,000 terminated non-vested members, and of those, there's quite a few that are 70 or older and have not been in contact with us for some time.
But we already have the dormant status in place, and that was considering the system status 30, and we've already moved a group of folks. However, we did not go through this process that we're looking at implementing now. I mean, we did we actually, Sandy's position, who is going to be in here later and is actually retiring, was hired for that purpose, to work and try to find those inactive people and, work the dormant files, and the board made the decision. I know, Scott, you were part of that years ago, and we moved a whole bunch of folks that had $1,000 or less to dormant status at that point in time. And then she worked on files that, from $1,000 on up to whatever, to try to locate those people.
I think it's safe to say that, for the number of people that might withdraw not having fully understood what they were giving up when they did that, far bigger problem is the number of people who leave for some reason when they're 30 years old and either didn't understand that they had money on account with us or forgot about it, or, I mean, it's surprising how many people
don't look at their paycheck to see what's coming out of that, really.
So is it within our power to change the rules such that after a certain number of years of attempting to get a hold of them, if they are in dormant status, that we make the rule up front that those funds just revert back to the system? That's not within our power.
So it's statutorily within our power, applying both the IRS requirements for non-forfeitability of benefits, and our statute right now, consistent with IRS law, says that a benefit has to be claimed, either with, refund of contributions or retirement benefit, within 5 years of the death of the member.
Oh.
So again, this is our effort to make sure people know, as soon as they leave the system as an active participant, how things are going to progress, and that, that's
And those
in the
rules are the
letter as
same for
well.
vested versus non-vested.
Yes, the 5-year following death applies to everybody. But otherwise, we can't change we can't say that, when you go dormant, you forfeited your benefit. They're entitled to recover it up to 5 years, them or their beneficiary up to 5 years after death.
And we have processed a lot of those.
Well, and I believe those funds are still part of our investment.
Yeah,
So it's not
absolutely.
like- So it's not like,
We lose
Right,
it.
we're not,
Yeah.
yeah, we're not gaining or really losing in
No.
any way. I mean, they have the right.
Take a break here for a second.
Sure. So let's finish up with this section and let's talk about the tentative meeting dates. The next meeting date is December 7th, and then January 15th, May 10th, and then we go quite a ways out, August 2nd. But let's look at least the next two. December 7th, which we talked about another time, and then February 15th.
I will not be here February 15th.
Look at February 8th, or
Yeah,
February.
you're gone the whole
I'm
month.
having a family reunion in Mexico from the 2nd to the 16th.
Awesome.
Oh.
Just.
can we meet there?
Yeah,
Yes.
let's have our board meeting.
You're all
in
welcome.
Mexico.
It's a very large condominium. So before or after the 2nd and 16th for me, but
I can do the 22nd.
We can't do this.
Yeah. So,
You could do March 1st.
I'm finding many things. I can't do it. I can't do it.
Let's just stick with 15th.
so it sounds like the March 1st or the 8th of the month out, is that? I thought I heard.
Oh, March 1st.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
And Dan said
I
he
mean,
would make the first.
Twenty seconds out.
That one's 2018.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
That's why I'm looking at the.
Let's just stick with the 15th. Rest of us, others we're gonna be pumping around.
Oh, I
for a
know, I'm
while.
calling over.
Hmm?
15th? Okay.
You can just call them.
yeah,
So
I
if
do
we
that
expect
too.
that, please.
from my surfboard.
From your
Really not hard to not be a bit jealous here. Maybe impossible.
All right, and then we'll just keep those other dates on. We know, it's hard to go that far out, I
Yeah,
think.
those are just tentative.
Just tentative. All right, this is public comment time. Is there anyone on here who would like to speak to what we've been discussing? Thanks Denise, by the way, for your report. That was highly informative. Should we quickly do the contract renewal for Drake Law Firm, and then that's just quick and easy? Okay. All right.
So on pages 27, 28, 29, and 30 of your board packet, you'll see the updated contract for our services that we through the Drake Law Firm as outside counsel to the TRS Board. And the changes are all in track changes format. So you can see we've extended the period from 2018 to 2021.
I didn't really understand the money here. Is Mike getting is going to 185 instead of 75? Is that what it is? Okay,
Yes.
and then the associated are going to 165 instead of 155?
Yes.
Right, okay, I just didn't understand that, all right.
So they're getting
Well,
both cases.
because one's before and one's after.
Yeah, I was like, what does
Make
this
it consistent,
mean?
Denise.
$10 an hour increase, but like I said in my write-up, I mean, we're locking him into that through October of 2021.
Mike works hard for us, I mean, it's super helpful. It's been moved and seconded, is there any further discussion?
I just want to raise one point. I told Mike that for sure I would do it with you. He wanted to make sure. We've previously talked about Drake Law Firm, Mike and/or Kurt, also assisting with revision of our contested case processes, administrative rules, that sort of thing in general. And of course, since we've been involved in an ongoing contested case, we've sort of put that aside. He wanted to make sure that you were all still comfortable that that was work that could be done and paid for under this agreement. The specific language that allows it is 3A 2i, but he just wanted to make sure that you were still on board with the law firm doing that work as well.
Yes.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Don't need to sign that right now. Let's take a break for 10 minutes. Come right back. Meeting back to order? For a little bit. We're never on time, but 15 minutes. We always need 15. There we go. Okay, we're on to the executive director's report and board legislation.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, in your packet, on pages, beginning on pages 33 and going all the way through 49 is the housekeeping bill, the language for the housekeeping bill, and so there weren't any real major changes to the bill, other than on the second page, which would be 34. There's a highlighted section in there about an employer must submit a wage and contribution report each and every month, and we talked a little bit about that earlier today, how that will help our accounting staff out in the summertime for delinquent agencies. The rest of the bill is largely unchanged, other than I just passed around the table. Yeah. New section 4. So Janice had called earlier in the week about new section 4, which is on page. It's on the bottom. It starts on the bottom of page 47. That sentence didn't read really all that well. The retirement system may make payments to a beneficiary is less than 21 years of age, only to an entity. So what we passed around is proposed change to that language, and I think this is much clearer. Denise came up with this sort of rewrite of that section. And it just makes it clear that we don't pay to a beneficiary who is less than 21 unless it goes through a custodian or entity or development that's designated as a custodian. So I think that's kind of clear the way that's written. And so we would, if the board approves of that change, we would make that update to the housekeeping bill prior to sending it up to the Legislative Services Division, eventually prior to sending it to Sharon, most likely.
Isn't a minor 18 though?
Yeah.
Under the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, it's age 21. Montana is one of the few states that is still higher than age 18. So if you wanted to propose legislatively that that be changed, that would be fine, but that is.
Not at our request.
Yes.
Right, okay.
We change it to 27?
Yeah.
We can send them to Ward 18, but they can't get their money until they're 21.
Yeah.
So, Madam Chair, I think, we like I said, the changes are those two, the highlighted in blue, and then also this, what I just passed around today. Other than that, it's the same bill, essentially, is what we looked at back in August. So if there, I think the best thing to do is see if there's questions from the board or comments.
What we're doing.
I wrote lots of notes as I read through this, so I'm just gonna review that.
Sure.
I'll let Sean answer the question, so you should feel free to ask them.
While we're thinking of a question on that, with relation to this, what's the definition of
It is,
Page 33.
right, it is a member, a retired member, or an alternate payee who has or is entitled to make a beneficiary designation. So rather than having to name all of those categories of people every time,
No questions on that? Should we take that? Emmons? Oh, Jeff, you're, oh, sorry.
So each of the references in the optional allowance section where it's talking about new section that doesn't have a number or a label.
yeah, it's still that way in here. We've modified it, though they're all numbered
They're numbered in this
now.
one.
Oh.
Inside your board packet, they're numbered.
Oh, yeah, this is the one I downloaded that you sent the link to.
Yeah.
It refers to something that
Will
when
you
you
change
be
it
a
up?
beneficiary, you have to have a social security number. And,
So,
I mean, what happens if
I
the
think
kid
on
is,
page 44, Jeff, of the packet.
your spouse is
first
from
part of
the
that
country,
next
and the
section.
kid doesn't have a social security number?
So therein lies the issue. The reason we require the social security number when they're designated is because we cannot pay to them without without a taxpayer identification number.
Okay.
For an individual, that's a social security number, and even a foreign individual can get a taxpayer identification number assigned for beneficiary purposes.
Okay.
But because we cannot pay without it, we don't want them designating without it.
Okay, because I thought,
It's still
Yeah.
on page 40, it says
It
section number.
comes up from time to time, we'll
New
have
section
people.
1.
yeah, because I just thought if you are not a United States citizen, you may not have that number.
B.
So, and then, in here someplace it talks about phone calls being recorded.
Quarter of the way down.
Right here.
Oh, yeah, that word.
Something said about
That'll be
being
filled in.
against the law, phone calls.
I see what you're
by
saying,
cities.
And so what is that, a new section of
Unless
law?
As required,
Unless
no,
it's
it would be the new section of this bill. So,
We'll
so
wait
it's
for more
either
conversation sometime.
Yeah.
beneficiary designation as required under. So we're
He's talking about page 40
where,
here.
where it's blank, it says new section blank, at the time of
Yeah,
retirement, the member shall.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
haven't filled that in, but the section numbers may change once this is the language for your purposes, but this is not done on the state's drafting macro, which I typically do before it goes to Sherry, and then she rewrites me anyway.
Rewrite it
So-
anyway.
Yeah, so all of those missing section numbers and that will be, all the cross-references will be filled in once we finally know what the section numbers actually are.
I think that,
New section within that statute.
Yes,
yeah, and I think that's actually referring to new section 1.
it probably is, yes.
New section.
Yeah,
Sorry, I thought you were talking about when it has new section 1, that
I guess I'm just wondering about the process for communication of new section 2. If somebody attempts to put a trust down as beneficiary, is there some way to make sure they understand what they're doing?
so that is partly why the requirements are going in statute now. This really is not a change other than
Okay.
the requirement that it be irrevocable upon payment by the retirement system is the only thing that is actually an addition. But the reason we're putting it in the statute now is that so hopefully individual, members, their financial advisors, that sort of thing will understand what our requirements are going in. But no, I will tell you that we turn back a lot of trusts identified as beneficiaries for lack of appropriate documentation, lack of the name of a trustee, lack of designation of either a current social security number for the trust, or if it's irrevocable, the tax ID number assigned to the trust. So trust as beneficiaries is a very complicated kind of.
So as soon as you see
area.
one, do you actually reach out generally and say, here's what you're doing, are you sure you know what you're doing here?
For new ones, yes.
Without providing them legal advice
Right.
on the creation of a
If you just say, hey,
trust
the
or.
only way this can be paid out is in a lump sum, I think
Yeah.
almost nobody would ever put trust. in
Our
purpose.
beneficiary designation forms have very clearly stated that for a
Okay.
long time. You'd be surprised how many people.
Well, it sounded good before.
I think it makes sense to put it in statute because they're more likely to live there than in TRS rules. Don't think so?
Well, the problem that I
It makes
see.
more sense.
The form
Yeah.
has it right on.
The problem I see is that with regard to 401Ks and IRAs, it's becoming more prevalent to list trust as
Correct.
beneficiary because of the advent in the last decade of conduit language and C2 language inside trusts. So I feel like attorneys really need to understand the difference between this and those.
Well, and the difference there is with the 401Ks and IRAs, all you're getting is that amount of money
Right.
anyway. It's all you're eligible to get. For us, the fact is they're giving up lifetime monthly benefits to, so, yeah, I mean, our communications that go out try to be far more, one of the other huge problems is that people can create trusts without ever talking to a lawyer. I mean, you can go online and get trust documents, fill in the blank kind of thing, and do people understand what it really is doing? So.
Say that like it's a bank. Okay, and then in addition, on page 50 and 51 of your board packet is the University System Supplemental Contribution Bill, and I didn't get the MUS report until earlier this week, but that can now be updated to say 11.89%, which I'll make that update. And those are the two bills that
Do they just like throw these in our motion? Every time.
well, we have a committee meeting on them, a discussion, and usually that's about it.
Okay, I just want to know what actually happens. It goes up there, it goes in the trash can or. Right,
Did somebody sponsor these for us?
So, the process is a little bit different this go-around than it has been in the past. Usually, the SAB committee will approve our bills for drafting, and they go up at the request of the TRS Board. This year, the SAB committee has not been approving any bill drafts, so I've reached out to Marilyn Ryan on our housekeeping bill, and provided she's reelected, which sounds like her chances are pretty good, she'll ask for, request, and carry the housekeeping bill. And then Representative Ryan Lynch out of Butte has agreed to do the same for our university system supplemental.
and now we need to discuss the request for public information, the active member name, salary, and employer that we received from Rachel Vogel. I think that we all understand that this is now part of our, we know we have to do this. Did she come back to say anything after we told her how much it was going to cost?
So nothing's been done on that
Oh,
yet until
okay.
we have this discussion.
All
So
right.
my recommendation was that we send back the message, and I actually, I don't think I put it in the packet, but I had copied you all
Yeah.
on a proposed response, letting her know that we could provide the information at a cost of $50, which is about how much time it would take me to do the query and clean it up and include it and save it as a PDF and send it off. Or in Excel, I guess if she asked for it in Excel, so it actually starts out as Excel, so easy enough to set it off that way. With that said, I think what we wanted to do was have Denise give us just a brief overview of the sort of the legal requirements regarding this specific public information request. We've had several public information requests in the past few years, and they've all been pertaining to retiree benefit amounts. This request is for active member salaries. So with that, I think maybe with your permission,
Yes,
Madam Chair,
please.
maybe we'll have Denise just touch on the legal cases, so you all are working with the right information.
Yeah, and I don't know that there are really legal cases. There are a number of attorney general opinions, but by and large, and I think, it doesn't bear a whole lot of conversation. The data elements requested in this information request, essentially the name of the individual, who their employer is, and the amount of earned compensation reported in one specific fiscal year, reported to the retirement system. The name of the individual and who their employer is clearly public information. Who is employed by public entities is clearly perceived to be public information. So are salary amounts of public employees. Now, it's entirely possible that all of the compensation paid by TRS employers to their individual employees is not exactly consistent with what they report as earned compensation, because there are bonuses and incentives and other kinds of payments made to TRS members that are not included in earned compensation for our purposes. There is not a case in Montana specifically on point of the issue, so the couple of points that I would point out are as follows. I am quite certain that if the individual were to go to the school districts, to the TRS employers, and request the information about how much money they reported as earned compensation as a derivative portion, of their overall compensation, it would absolutely be deemed to be public information that the school districts or other TRS employers would have to provide. Now, the fact that it's available somewhere else doesn't save it from being public information in our hands. And if it's public information, the only defense to the requirement to provide it is there an individual right of privacy that outweighs the public right to know. I think that it is so clearly a direct correlation to compensation for public employment, and all of the case law from other states would state, and I didn't bring the white paper again, but if you recall when we went through the request from We newspapers, I did a significant, sort of composite picture of the Attorney General opinions, and the case law relied on in those, as well as case law from other states directly on point. And there are a couple in that white paper, if you still have it, that are directly on point. That the amount, that the factors used in calculating public retirement benefits related to years of service, compensation used for calculation of the benefit, and that are all so closely related to compensation for public employment that there is no individual right of privacy that would outweigh the requirement to provide that information under the public right to know. So I don't know if, my sense was from the comments that came back was that we have a concern potentially about us being the conduit for providing the information when it's available from other sources. And once again, the analysis that we have to make is it public information? And if we've determined that it's public information, then is there a counterbalancing individual right of privacy that would prevent us from providing that information? And recall under Montana law that an individual right of privacy constitutionally is specific to one single breathing human being. TRS does not have a right of privacy. The public school districts providing the information or other employers providing the information to us do not have a right of privacy. The question is, do the individuals who that information pertains to, do they have an individual right of privacy? I don't see any avenue for making a determination that that's the case.
If this was a case related to retirees, what information would
So what we've provided in the past for retirees, if they're asking for the benefit amount, is we have not provided a name. We would come up with a unique TRS identifier and we send them, so instead of a name, we get a number and then the benefit amount.
And the difference being a retiree clearly is not an employee of the
It's not
state
their
public
current-
entity.
It's not their current salary.
Right.
So and that's been the board's position on all those retiree information requests has been, paraphrasing a bit, is that that's an actual retirement benefit, and there's more that goes into that than just their salary they've earned over the years. That it can also include service purchases, it can include return pay. It's not a one-to-one same kind of issue as a current public employee's salary. It's a
So,
No, that was
What's-
the information that we provided to lead newspapers, I believe,
which
is
is the
correct.
most recent request.
I think we provided information to Montana Watchdog. I would have to verify
I don't
that.
see it.
That, well,
We were
they
asked
were,
for
they
it.
were,
We-
they were prior to.
They didn't come back.
They were prior
Yeah.
we're prior to,
to the lead
To the lead.
lead
Right,
newspapers.
yes,
that was
yes.
recent.
but what,
However, it's the same individual, not
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
name, employer, and then in that case, I believe we provided not the retirement benefit, but the amount of employer contributions. Again, I don't believe they may not have picked the information up, but I think that's the information that the board approved providing in that case. The name, the employer, and the amount of employer contributions remitted on behalf of the individual.
A quick comment and question. I did a little research on this up in the books. They are an organization funded by a political action committee, hard-right conservative organization that's sending out mass mailings to lots of organizations like this just to see how much information they can collect. The reason I bring that comment up is because Denise, you made a very important comment. Do we have the right to send them a letter back just saying because they can access the information through other sources, why should we be able to, why should we have to provide it? So if that's not possible, the other question is, because it takes our time and resource, I mean, we're discussing it now in this meeting, you guys have to put some people to work on it. What leeway do we have in the fee that we charge?
I think it has to be commensurate with the cost, so, I know I can do it in less than an hour, around an hour, and we're working.
Well, but,
Working right now.
but if we're gonna start doing things beyond what we've done in the past, which, if the only things we've done in the past is the retirees and we've given numbers, not names and that kind of stuff, then I think, if we start providing names, then I think we also need to include the cost of informing those people as well.
Well, then that's part of this discussion item, as far as how do we want to notify our members? I think we do need to do that.
I do too, and that is a cost, that's a
Yeah.
large cost.
Yeah, that's true.
I still
So
don't
does,
feel like it's our information to give.
None of
We
us do.
collect that information as
Exactly.
part of what we do, but
They
it's
could
not
go
our
out to each
information.
individual school
Information
district and
belongs
get
to
it.
the school district. It's their public information, it's not
Right,
our
but
public
once we
information.
receive it, I think it's a hard argument that we likely don't win to say it's not public information as we consolidate.
I think we just need to, I think we need to treat it like we did our others. They can get a number, we can even go to the extent of, because there's no benefit, talking about the amount of money received, public money received to support that benefit, those kinds of things. But I struggle being conduit for these guys to not contact schools, and that's exactly what it is. Their goal is to have all of this information online immediately, all the time. That's the only thing they're interested in. And right or wrong, I don't have a super problem with that. I just have a problem that they're just they're just completely ignoring who the employer is in this scenario.
Well, so let me point out, and some of the case law from other states dealing with the issue has made the case that there is not necessarily a one-to-one correlation between the compensation paid by an employer, again, and the amount of the retirement benefit or the amount of pensionable compensation is the term that's frequently used, and that people may have an interest in validating the information provided to a retirement system as opposed to what should have been provided. But beyond that, under the case law in Montana, the decision-making process is very clear. Is it public information? Now, the definition, and I'm sorry I didn't bring my code book, but the definition of public information essentially is information created or maintained by a public agency for the purposes of performing the functions that it performs. And that's very loosely paraphrasing. But in my mind, there's absolutely no question but that all of the data elements being requested in this request for information are public information in TRS's hands. So then the next step of the process simply is there a counterbalancing individual right of privacy that would prevent us from giving that information on a request for public information?
However, in this case, I believe there's a practical application that would benefit us. If you read her request, it says, our agency is just exercising the general rights of the public. For these reasons, we're requesting a waiver of fees. If there's a charge for this service, please obtain my approval in writing. So here's my point. They're just trying to access as much free, quick information as they can get.
Yeah.
A minor deterrent is going to avoid this whole issue. So I believe if you send them an email back saying it's $200, they're going to say, don't send it.
The statute for provision of public information and our policy on providing public information is that you can bill them the actual cost of providing the information in the most cost-effective, efficient manner possible. So we can't just say what amount of money would dissuade them from requesting the information. It has to be the actual cost of providing the information.
I don't really want to go through all of this stuff again.
Yeah.
We've already been through this and the good, the bad, the ugly. I don't have a problem with providing things on a similar basis to what we provided in the past. I have a problem with putting names attached to anything. I don't care if it's public information or not, I have a problem with that. I think that is potentially a concern on privacy basis that goes beyond the whole discussion, and I don't think we are the ones to judge that. If we want to put a number to that and we want to talk about how the public money is being used in relation to that, I don't have a problem. But to all of a sudden become the conduit for them to not have to ask this money or ask other sources for this money, I don't want to do that. I think there are places they can get that money from, or that
They don't
information.
even have to ask, they can just go to their websites and look up their salary agreement.
Yeah,
They can figure it out.
I just don't want to, because this is not the first one that's going to come if we all of a sudden open the door. And unless somebody else tells us that we absolutely have to, and that somebody else would probably have to be a court, I don't think we just provide it. I hate to say that.
I think part of your calculation for cost, we really do need to inform every member
Oh, yeah, no, I
ahead of
agree,
time,
and
and
that
so-
should be included, that was
so
a great point.
printing, mailing,
Yeah. Yeah,
all of that.
If we decide to provide it, I mean,
Right.
it sounds. I
that's
think
what the
that's-
calculation should be, yeah.
But what Denise just said about what it costs to provide that information, can we include those costs?
Of course, because we need to inform our members, and that, we wouldn't have to do that without this request.
Well, and here's my thing, okay, let's say we just say, no, we're not gonna do this. They're gonna have to come back with that to us, maybe with an attorney, whatever, and make us do it. That's okay, there we go. But just the very same thing, you give them my information, I can come back and say to you guys, listen, I'm gonna sue you.
Yeah. You
I can do
could,
the
but
same
like
thing.
you said, you can look it up on your school district. website.
Exactly.
It's already.
But I-
Well, true,
let them
but
do
the
that.
argument is that I think the individual members can make is, are you the appropriate agency to be providing that information on on privacy for me, or is my employer the one? So I think there are arguments that are out there. I don't think we should lead the charge on this thing. If we can provide something and make it comparable to what we're doing before, I don't have a problem with it. I have a problem with it if it's got names attached to it and it's their salary.
Here's what our board would like to give you. We'd like to give you numbers and salary amounts with their school district and their zip code.
And it'll
We're not gonna
cost
give you the
this.
name, you can go look. You can go look up the name, go look up Carrie Pie for yourself. You can look up how much I make. You can figure it out, how many years I've got, look at my seniority, look at my salary schedule, you can figure it out. It's gonna take a while, it'll take a heck of a lot longer than
Oh, yeah,
getting
they
it all
just get
from.
an Excel file from us.
And I know there are states that are providing that kind of information now. But it's the state just up front, just saying, we're not gonna fight this battle anymore, and we're just dumping it all out there. You guys make it happen. This isn't one of those states. Our state hasn't made that commitment to this, to provide that level of, and I don't think TRS should be around it.
And I
Well,
still say
for
if we.
public state agency, public employees, the state has,
I understand that, but we're not talking about it.
I still think that if we figured the cost of informing our members into it, so that it wasn't just a cursory administrative cost, because this is a genuine effort that you guys have to go through to provide this information. And if we inform our members, it precludes lawsuits, and if, whatever that figure comes out to be, I would imagine in the several hundreds of dollars, it's gonna preclude any of these frivolous types of requests from ever going through in the first place. To me, that seems like the most logical and appropriate solution.
Because our members really do feel like our stuff with you is private. I get it, I mean, this is not, you're not giving out my benefit amounts, you're not giving out my, what I've got on hand here. I get that, my account balance.
Could we
But
ask
I
for
just
comments
feel
from
like-
the public? What do you think, Diane?
You know, I think this is a really difficult question because whether you can impose the cost of informing members, I think that would be one that you would want to check further into before doing, because the state does clearly reveal the salaries of its employees, and so that's not necessarily you, but there is something already happening out there that clearly, I can go on the state website anytime and look at the per hour cost of any state employee.
Sure.
So there is information out there now. If you want to look more closely at how you meet the statutory requirements in terms of the cost to the individual, so that would seem to be a solution that the board would like to do, worthwhile in your time.
This is just frustrating for us. I mean,
Oh,
and
yeah,
I
no,
know,
I
and
get it.
I get it, like, I know we have to follow the law, but, you know, sometimes laws are stupid. They're just stupid. And, you know, I know that I have to follow them. I know I have to drive the speed limit, but I wanna go faster.
It's no less frustrating for internal staff, I will tell you that. And so, you know, I can only give you my best advice based on the statutes as they're written, the case law that's out there, the analysis that the court applies. I think it is absolutely clear in case law in Montana that employees, public employees, have no right of privacy in the amount of their compensation for public employment. And I don't think that analysis will be any different based on the fact that it's coming from the retirement system than if they were to receive it directly from the employers. It is also, again, not a legal defense that I find in any case law or in the statute that they can get it from somebody else, so they can't ask for it from us.
Denise, can they ask the IRS for this information?
No, the IRS, oddly enough, is the one entity that has absolute, and you know that from the conversations about people who have not provided their tax returns. IRS information is not public information.
So to shorten this up a little bit, would it be possible for you to check into the potential legalities of the cost of informing your members as part of this answer, and get back to us if we need to have a telephone board meeting to make the decision when we do that.
So let me just throw out with respect to that request, that one of the things, if you are potentially asserting an individual right of privacy for our members, then existing case law as well would be, and if you recall, when we had the initial request from Montana Watchdog, initially they were asking for the 10 highest benefit payees. We sent notices to those 10 people and about the request for information and asked them whether they were willing to waive any right of privacy. If we're going out with notice to our members, by really and truly, if we're asserting an individual privacy right of our members, we should be asking them if they're willing to waive it. So if we're, depending on, you know, how you're proposing
I don't think
to
that's what
notify
my
them.
answer is. I just said notify that this information may be going out. I mean, clearly, they should be notified.
Well, I
I
think
didn't say
it's,
that they should be asked if they wanted to.
How
if
are
we
you?
decide that the information's going, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And so my request is that you would check into the, one, cost of doing that, and two, the legality of saying this is a bona fide cost to this individual, and then we could better address the issue.
To add to his question, when we established the $50 administration fee, that was based on the assumption at the time as to what amount of effort would go into fulfilling the request.
Right.
So now we're contemplating an appropriate additional service, which is to inform our members. And I have one additional question about the nature of the informing the members. Do you think it is legitimate to tell them where the information is going to? That's a separate question, but please hold off on answering, because to finish my statement, if we were going to inform our members and the cost went up to something that seemed administratively appropriate, again, maybe that's $200, I'm guessing. It would seem to me that that very simple administrative shift is well within a gray area of acceptability on whoever's going to be overlooking us in that, and it's going to preclude many of these, what I would deem frivolous requests.
It could become highly cost prohibitive if you send an individual letter to every member.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're asking you to do.
Yeah, no, I think, and so I think that the only thing that was the question is whether we would say who was requesting it.
I would want to know.
And I don't, you would want to know?
I would.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
I would
And we
imagine
might-
we would
and we
provide
might
that
do
information
it
anyway,
a
or
year
they,
from now.
everybody would be calling to ask the
Right.
question,
Yes,
but who?
exactly.
Asking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Would that be good enough for you? I mean, your argument is that we're not gonna do it regardless.
I would argue that I think there's a better way. I would argue that we already have a process that we're using for retirees, and I think we just need to modify it.
So we use some number identified.
Yeah. And we're doing our piece, and we're, and we just, I do believe it's a right to privacy, and I believe that we don't include the salary, we include the contribution to the system.
My guess is.
Because there are,
So what, then we're
Very
not,
strict.
we're not providing anything with the request.
But we're still
So we
providing
may as well just say no.
right.
Well, you can tell them what it'll look like and how much it'll cost.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that.
And that probably
I'm fine
would
with
cost
you just to
$50
say-
because we wouldn't have to send letters out to anybody if it was a non. So it's just a number.
Now, maybe from that action, we determine a better way to deal with future ones or whatever, but I think on an immediate basis, that's what we've agreed we do for retirees. It took us a long time to get to that point. I don't want to spend that time to get to that point on this one, when we can do something comparable and maybe that, you know, I'm sure that's.
But why would it be the contributions instead of the actual salary?
Because we're not the employee, or the employer. We're the person taking the contributions from the employer. We can list the employer, we can list the contributions, we can list the number of the employee.
And then just state in the letter,
Because we're not
this is
the
public
employer.
information if
This
you
is
request
public
it from
information.
the
You're just-
employer.
You're asking the wrong person for this information. For the information that you're asking for, you're asking the wrong person. For the wrong place.
Denise's argument is it doesn't matter how we got the information, it's still it's still.
So,
I'm not disagreeing with that at all, I just don't believe that that's an argument that we want to have with our members.
So we're fiduciary responsible to our members. I'm not
And I-
fiduciarily responsible to
And
Michelle.
I agree that 5 years from now, we might get to exactly that point. But we get to exactly that point by going through the process of making sure members understand what it is we have to do, making sure that we're doing what the court believes we should do, that we're involving all of the other pieces of the mix. I'm just saying, I don't want to go through all those pieces right now to provide that information on these people. And I believe we're doing that by all of a sudden coming up with a conduit for how we can inform our members that we're going to share that information. I think when we do that, we're going to get dumped on, just like we did last time, of all of their comments and all of their thoughts, and we're going to have to take a hard look at whether or not we actually want to follow through and do that by the time it's all said and done. If we're going to go through that process, I'd just as soon go through this first. Because I think we are trying to respond to public information in terms of what's available, and I think we're trying to be respectful of the fact that the employer is this school district.
Were we heading toward a court case last time, and then the Greek Department of Information agreed to take what we were going to give and it ended? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I mean, presumably, right, I mean, they certainly would have had, they could have tried to take us to court on it. But they ended up taking what we decided we would offer.
so I'm sorry, Scott, I want to make sure, because nothing with individual member names attached to it. That's sort of your bottom line.
We've already made that determination. I'm just saying we do the same thing with active members.
And then which contributions, employee or employer?
Employer.
And then-
Well, actually, we could identify both of them as far as that goes, but,
And that's really the two of them together is the sum.
because that's what's going into our system.
I mean, for me, I guess, if we're not giving a name, I'm comfortable giving the salary too. It sounds like you're not, but
Well,
if we're not, if that is public information,
I'm
Maybe you're saying it's
same
not,
with you, but as
but
long as I'm not
if the
attached.
name's not
to it,
attached to
I
it.
don't care what it is.
Well, I don't want to, here's what I'm worried about. If we go that direction, then the argument becomes, are we going to be the provider of the names? I think the argument needs to be, are we going to be the appropriate agency to provide the information they're requesting? That's the argument. It's not whether or not we're going to provide the names.
So we offer them information that we've created.
We already provide information for our employees. It's out on the state website. Other districts provide that information on their employees. Okay? Nobody in the state is consolidating all of that stuff out there to make it easy for all these people to grab. I don't want us to be the ones that do that. I don't think that's appropriate.
With that being said, let me just say, we are the only entity that can provide the information about what was reported as earned compensation for purposes of calculating retirement benefits. That cannot be
Well, not for-
obtained
not for
from any
retirement.
other employer.
We came from all of them.
It could be obtained from all of them, yes.
Actually,
But
that's not true. My school district can provide that information as it applies to
Exactly.
me.
Correct.
They're the employer. I believe they're the appropriate one to provide that information. They're the ones that have a board that's responsible for their operation and answerable to their public. We are not those people. And I believe that that needs to be handled on the local level. And as a result of that, I don't have any problem tying it to things that are applying to our business, per se.
So like.
There are details associated with how we provide those benefits that we've already named as being private. I think when we start providing those pieces to that puzzle, then we also get to a scenario to where our retirees' potential release of information becomes more evident because we're already doing it with our active people. And I don't want to go there. I just don't think we're not the appropriate agency for this request.
Denise, can I ask you a
Needs to go to
question?
the appropriate agency.
Is there any law that you're aware of that would, if we provide names and contributions and salaries to this organization, for example, is there anything that precludes them from utilizing that as a contact list and now sending out blanket emails to all of our active members?
That's one of the reasons why we didn't want to do the retirees.
Exactly.
Because it
that.
was for people, yeah, insurance salesmen and
Yeah.
all kinds of things.
We are prohibited under state law from providing contact lists essentially, which would include names, addresses, telephone numbers, emails. So any of those contact informations combined with a name. There's a statute that says we don't provide that information. But I would not view this as being one of those prohibited lists because they're not asking for address, phone number, or email address.
But with the name by itself, they can generate that through computer searches very readily. And I expect that that's actually what they intend to do, is utilize that information for other purposes.
Well, exactly, once you attach a
Well,
name to the school district,
Right.
you can get everybody's emails.
Anything you want.
You can get everybody's emails.
If you go out to their website, they have a map of the United States, you click on whichever state you're interested in, and then it'll bring up all the federal government employees and salaries, all the state government employees and salaries, all for the states that provide it, the school district.
And bear in mind that while we are prohibited from creating contact lists and providing them externally, people can come in and use our records to create those on their own. Somebody could come in and say, I want to look at the membership record of every one of your active members for purposes of creating a mailing list. And we would have to redact the personal information, but they would be allowed, by law, they're allowed to do that. The statute says so.
Okay, right.
I guess I was just trying to make the point of what they're asking here is not related to the retirement. They're asking for reported, well, I guess it's pensionable wages, but anything is a reported pensionable wage, everything I make. So, what is it? My
Any
health
bonus or
insurance.
incentive, your health insurance
There are
premiums.
some things that one can't.
Yeah.
But doesn't OPI have that very same information? So nowhere in the state has that
School district
information.
does.
The school that creates the report to TRS and TRS have the information about what's reported as earned compensation.
Yeah.
It's pensionable compensation is the,
But see, I think, and I looked at that site and saw some of the stuff on there, I don't remember seeing the cities, I don't remember seeing the schools, I don't remember, all I remember seeing is state agencies.
If you, it depends which state you look at, some states are
Well, no, I'm in
provided.
Vermont.
Yeah, for Montana, they're not. If you look at Wyoming, for instance, you'll see that there's the school district employees and their city
Sure.
employees.
Wyoming's got a different set of whatever, rules and expectations, however it's going.
So if this got to a point where we're headed toward a court case, we can't make the argument it's not our data to give. The only argument we can make is whether or not this is public information and whether or not the individual's right to privacy supersedes the fact that it's public.
exactly,
Those are the only two.
yes.
So can you make that argument? Should we say we don't believe this is public information?
Well, I think in this scenario, I think we say that it's not that we don't believe that there isn't public information available here, that we don't believe for the request to be honored the way it's offered, that we are the appropriate agency to be providing information that we don't have. And we don't
I
have all.
agree with that, I just don't know if it's a legal argument.
Well, I'm not sure it's a legal argument with our retirees either.
And also, if you
Provided
look,
with our retirees.
if you look at the language in this request even further down, it says, under the Open Records Act, all non-exempt portions of any partially exempt documents must be disclosed. If any records or portions of records are withheld, please state the exemption on which you rely, the basis on which the exemption is invoked, and the name of the individual responsible for the decision.
And that kind of language in a public records request like this gets precisely to, so, the cost of $50 for providing the information is because you don't want to invite somebody in your front door to look at your membership records to aggregate the information that they want. You want to provide them only what's requested and in a format that doesn't put at risk information that there is a right of privacy attached to. So, you know, I mean, you'll see different data elements provided by different states, even on websites like this that aggregate from many states, because other states do have different statutes about what constitutes public information and what's protected, and are able to enforce those provisions because their constitution says what private information is in the state. Montana is very wide open with respect to
In some
public
regards, I mean,
information.
when we look at things like what the state has to provide, what schools have to provide in terms of public information, much of that is managed through the Office of Public Instruction, following federal and state guidelines on what needs to be provided, and they actually provide a website that shares that information and does all that other stuff. What's happening here is they're kind of foregoing all of the other layers of what's happening here to get to specific information the district should be asked for.
Clearly, I don't think we're ready to make any sort of decision. Can we get to the point where we can say, yes, we would like some more information and meet again, even if by phone? Because clearly, we could sit here for hours.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we can try to determine, and we'll be able to, you know, what the cost of providing the notice would be, how much that costs, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it would be the names and salary amounts, it's whatever information we decided to provide, I suppose we still would need to be able to notice our membership, right?
sure,
I mean, you could make a motion.
true. I'm not opposed to making a motion. I just want to hear what everybody else thinks.
Well, it's not an action item, so what do we have to do with this?
It is an
It is
action.
an
Oh, it is an
Yeah, I
action
had
item. Oh, you
correction.
did put it down, okay. I just looked up above, okay.
Well, I'll just make a motion. I think we provide information on a comparable basis to what we do with our retirees for the same purposes. And that information would include a number for each member. It would include contributions made associated with each of our members, and would include the employer of that member. And I don't remember what else we provide.
So,
They wanted the zip code on the
Zip code.
employers. That's easy.
Well, I don't necessarily want to provide it for them. They can look it up. But what do we provide on, that's what I'm saying, I think it needs to be comparable to what we provide, a similar template to what we're already doing with the retirees.
I don't remember if they asked for the employer and the employer's zip code. I think they did, employer at least, on the retirees, but I have to look.
And by template, I'm assuming you're speaking specifically to what we provided to Lee newspapers.
Yes, because that was the
Because
one
it
time
was
we
a
came to-
different data set that we provided to Montana Watchdog, so.
No, the latest, actually, I'm not even sure it was Lee's newspapers, I believe it was somebody associated with Colorado.
It was a lady in Colorado, yes it was.
Ultimately, we just flat out told them we wouldn't provide them the information and they didn't come back.
No, I thought we would provide them on this basis and we
We did.
Yes,
Yep.
that's correct.
And
The
that's
last time we
exactly how I
actually
want this to be
sent
laid out
it
this
was.
way. This is what we'll
That's what I
provide,
would like to.
this is what we'll provide, this is what the cost of that would be. Leave it on there.
They may come back and make us do this, I get it. But I think we still have to, this is what's important to us as a board, you know, this is where we're at. And I want to know how everybody else is at, I'm
Well,
not saying,
it
I'm
just states
speaking
in
for
the letter.
myself.
And it might be a moot point if there isn't a second to that, but that's what I believe is fair.
I would only say this, I would probably vote no right now because I'm just not ready to make that decision. I need some more data, I want to know how
Well,
much
we
this
can
other stuff
table
will
it, we
cost.
can do whatever, but
That's why I
I'm
kind
not
of
opposed to
suggested
that
that in
either,
the
but-
first.
Could we get a 1-week FBI investigation?
And it's
gonna limit
it's
the way
spelled
this is.
I don't believe it makes
W-E-A-K
any
in this
I
case.
don't
We-
believe it made any difference, so.
I'm willing to second that. And vote on it today.
I have to agree with Jeff. This is a pretty complicated thing, and I'll just quickly say, because we've talked about it a long time, this kind of request is gonna come up more and more often in the future. So as a board, we need to have a pretty clear concept of how we're gonna handle it in the future. And it occurs to me too, that this request is considerably more specific, as I recall, than that last request was in terms of the types of information they're requesting. So if we have this template that we're going to utilize, but it doesn't comport to the information they're requesting, does that put us in additional jeopardy? I just don't know the answer to those questions. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty is, we have a policy on public information, so I guess the implementation of public information is what's up in the air.
yes.
But I hate to sound redundant, but I believe we made a stand on that with the last case. And I'm not sure I'm ready to go off that stand.
Did you second his motion? We're still discussing. Is there any further discussion? It's been moved that we provide, similar to what we have in the past, a number associated with our members, contributions made, the employer of the member, and possibly the zip code, that's the thing, with the cost associated to all of those things. Seconded, all those?
And if there are the data pieces that were used before the recess, without knowing what those are right now, it's hard.
Just saying, that's why I can't vote for this, because I don't know exactly what we're trying to promote.
But I mean, if this fails, we're just not going to go back. So I'm okay with that, this is just what I know.
That's good, good discussion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of Scott's motion, indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
I'd say tie vote. Which means?
Motion fails.
Fails.
So, well, I'll leave it.
So I would like the information that I've asked for, and whenever you can get that to us, and maybe the details of what it was that we sent out with regard to retirees, so we can look at that, have a discussion. Could even be phone conference discussion.
So we also need a motion on that, correct?
I don't think we need to have a motion to do that,
Well, this is an action item, that's why I'm.
but the action is right now
We
that it's
already-
at this
we already-
point
Okay,
tabled.
we're done,
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
tabled.
essentially,
Okay.
Unless there's another motion to come up, we're done.
Okay.
Do you see a time crunch where we have to deal with this before the next board meeting of where we can actually get together? I think we have a much better conversation when we're sitting here versus on that telephone. Is there a time issue?
You know, I mean, I think we can just sort of never mind the policy. Our policy is within 10 days, which is why I was, wanting to send a response that I initially, I suppose. So that 10 days is coming down. I think, really, we could let it sit until the next board meeting and see if she follows up with the request.
Clearly, we're doing the best that we can.
We are.
I'm laughing just because my thought was, we'd be more than happy to provide the information, but we only do that once a decade, so next time we vote on it, we'll let you know.
And that's 2027.
That's right.
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't know, I mean, I suppose in the meantime, between now and the next board meeting, they
We may
can
have
follow
to.
up with some more.
And if that's the
Well,
case,
and-
let's
Obviously,
meet.
you'll be communicating with
Yes.
them the
Well,
results of what's going on in the federal government.
No.
Well, I don't
give
know
them
what
a-
to tell them at this point, so.
Your board has
The
very-
board will be
very-
addressing this in December, and if you need the information before that, contact the individual.
No,
Feel free to watch the
don't
meeting.
offer that.
Put a date.
Don't offer that.
I think there's
We're
a good
still working on it.
possibility that if you just don't respond, this was a shotgun approach, and they're gonna try and see how much information they can gather, they won't even make another request.
Yeah, there is no answer
That's
until
a
there's an
little
answer. We
optimistic.
haven't made a determination.
Yeah,
And
Unless
who's
she
TRS
contacts you again,
Who's
I mean, we're
TRS
working.
web admin? Who is that?
that's.
So we don't have a person, nobody read it, nobody knows. No,
No, I think we reacted appropriately and
Well, I think we owe them a response, whether it's now or later, either way, I think we do have
I'm
to
sure that the
respond.
TRS.
You could respond saying that we are still
I
in
think you responded.
It's under review.
Yeah, and that's, or December probably, right?
December.
Maybe.
That's our next board.
Oh, okay, December.
December. Don't skip that one,
I don't know why I skipped that one.
because it's December and we're in
I
Montana.
guess.
All right,
Okay,
so
but in the
let's,
meantime, I can get that information that we are all sort of interested in as far as what it might cost. And we'll look at what we provided on the retirees.
Sure.
Okay,
thank you,
all right.
thank you. You're still on executive summary and staff update.
Do you make a motion on the housekeeping?
Oh,
We need that.
we should do that one.
Well, yeah.
Did
We asked for public comment. We did not, I don't think we have anything on
No.
the two bills, do we? Or do we?
I don't have a motion that was, you have an
It
action
wasn't,
item.
so do we need a motion just to say that these are okay and we want to take them to the legislature?
Yes.
But we can do it together on the motion.
You can do one motion, yeah, for both of them.
So moved.
I moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well.
Okay, great. So, moving on to the staff update, which is on page 32 of your packet. So Sandy Donahue, which I had asked her to step in so you can say thank you. She's announced her retirement. She's been with TRS for about 16 years. Her last day at TRS will be October 31st. So Sandy works in the, she's a benefit specialist for TRS. She works in the, mostly on recorded in error to PRS or recorded in error to TRS and just straight transfers from PERS to TRS or TRS to PERS. So we will miss Sandy, but she's, I think, at one point I asked Shannon to let her know, are you gonna get to this in about 15 minutes? And that
She was
about
standing
2
out
hours,
there.
3 hours.
She was standing out
Was
there
she?
for a few minutes.
Oh,
I
okay,
should
didn't
have
even
waved
see
her
her.
in.
Shoot. So anyway, if you get a chance to talk to Sandy before you leave today, that would just, thank her for her years of service. And then the second one there is with Bryn Dennehy leaving TRS, that opened up a spot in the active membership group for a benefit officer, and Margot Lilly was our successful candidate for that hiring. She comes to TRS with considerable benefit experience that she learned at Costco Corporate as well as MSU. So she's been here now for, this is her second week, and she's learning the job. And I think she'll be great for us.
Legislative interim.
Okay, and then agenda item G there, legislative interim committee update. I think I've already sort of let you know this, but the SABA committee's not approving bill drafts, so we're gonna have Representative Marilyn Ryan, and then Representative Ryan Lynch carry our two bills for us. And they will meet again in November. I didn't have the date at that point, but I think Sherry did send me their SABA committee date.
13th?
November 13th, so I'll be up there presenting the results of the evaluation on November 13th, and then the same likewise with the Legislative Finance Committee on December 3rd. Present the results of the evaluation we got from Todd today.
Do you do the same report that they do?
It's mostly the same. I remove a few of the slides, but yeah, it's essentially the same thing.
Is public comment time? Does anybody have anything to say?
I was just going to say that with regard to the committee meeting on the 13th, that we're very grateful for Sean's willingness to come over and present that actuarial evaluation, and I'll be working with him. And as you probably know, we do summary sheets for the legislators, and so we'll be digging into that valuation and getting those numbers out of that, and hopefully putting that together tonight in a summary. And we have a legislator's guide. So I'm also really grateful to your staff to help me make sure that, I'm accurately summarizing the provisions of the plan, and, that the guide contains information that's useful to legislators. And I guess that's all I wanted to
Thank you.
say. Thanks to you guys, because I know I'll be I'll be saying, please help. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you for taking that, that step too, because a lot of times, not a lot of times, but sometimes that communication gets lost, and that's an important piece to what that committee does, as well as, kind of our conduit to the working committees.
Right, and I'm always open to, you receive a lot of questions from legislators, so when you know what those are and we can anticipate that and put that in a legislator's guide, it really helps, especially in the heat of a session, to be able to pull out information and say, yes, this question gets asked a lot, and therefore, we have this information available. So, thanks.
Big job. Strategic planning.
Okay, so behind tab 6 in your board packet on pages 53 through 56 is the strategic planning portion. I put in the updates that we have available. Most of these are from our last meeting. They're in red font. I think Darla has, I know Darla has. Darla has actually completed the early and mid-career presentation for TRS members, and that will be presented to a live group for the first time at the Billings, the convention in Billings, MEMFP convention in Billings, or MFP convention this year. But what it is out available on our website, and actually I think Darla has 2 printed copies that we were gonna try to shine it on the wall and show you the presentation. It turned out really good, I think. I mean, it's in my opinion at least, it's at the right level of detail, and it's in, as layman terms as possible, so it's fairly easy to understand. And it presents all of, I think, what's the appropriate information for early career. So we'll pass that around for you to look at. Additionally, we had sent, or I had sent, I guess, the link to the webpage that Darla built on the school boards, and I got a few comments from the board. And we're moving forward with updating that with the right links to the things that we said we were going to link in there, and then I think we'll just go live with that here before too long. Yeah. Beyond that, I don't think I have anything in particular that I wanted to talk about. So, like I said, the things that are sort of newer from our last meeting discussion are in the red font. And the early mid-career presentation, that was supposed to be due in October of 18, and that's what's making its way around the room. So, is there any questions or comments?
I was just wondering, have you guys ever thought about just videotaping that thing in Billings?
We're going to.
Oh, good, because that would be excellent. For especially, people from Catskill are not going to Billings. They're just not.
Right.
It's just too far. So, I know.
And you have the Ready, Set, Retire from last year, there's a video of that out there.
Yeah.
And I think you're gonna
It's
update that as
sometimes-
well, right?
Yeah, sometimes difficult to get a good enough video.
Yeah.
We try.
Yeah.
The last time, I tried 3 times before finally was able to get one that was workable.
Yeah.
And we're gonna do the same for this one. But in the meantime, there's both the colored version that you're looking at and black and white printable ones on the website. For both the Ready, Set, Retire and for this new one.
Okay. Good. It's really good.
Yeah, and so you can, all of you, if you're interested, you can log and look at the full, screen version of that on our website. I think you can,
Right. Public comment, public has left us, so we'll just move on. Regular survivorship and adjustments. So this was our busy month, holy
Yes.
cow.
Active, yeah, absolutely. So Madam Chair, members of the board, the active team processed from the months of April through August 31st, 527 applications. Summer is always our busiest time of the year. And the predominant group of folks retiring were school district employees.
you know, the averages for the total, they're real close to what it shows in our evaluation as far as years of service.
That is on page 70.
Average age 65, really? I'm surprised. For the use system?
Oh, university.
University.
I was
Yeah.
looking at 7.
Yeah.
And see, yeah, and the average service for use systems 33.61. I mean, they do typically work longer.
Still 61.4.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that that's an indication really, because we're talking about members that had to start before 93. Most of those people are sticking around. If we were only talking about the people that started before 93, our age would move up too.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, you have other,
Yeah,
the whole
young people are bringing it
subset
down or
that
gone.
are, right, they're
Yeah.
not available for that.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point.
All right, Denise, we're legal counsel report.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the board, this will be quick and very painless. We still have only one contested matter pending, and that's the Zabrocki matter, which of course you issued your final decision in. Mr. Zabrocki has filed a petition for judicial review in the First Judicial District Court. It was originally assigned to Judge Reynolds, who, if you'll recall, was the judge who had the case on the interim petition for judicial review following the remand back to the hearings examiner on motions for summary judgment. It sat in Judge Reynolds' court for more than a year before a decision on that petition was finally made. And so based, primarily on the backlog currently in Judge Reynolds' court and the wait period for decisions from him, we have filed a motion to substitute the judge. We haven't received an order on that yet, so I don't know whose court it will be in. I will go today to the Drake Law Firm and pick up the record to file with the district court for that review. I can't give you any estimate of what the time on it will be, but I expect it will be a review of all of the decisions, all of the exceptions filed by Mr. Zabrocki before you issued your final decision, so I don't think it's gonna be a short process. I think it'll take some period of time.
Nothing about this issue is short.
It has not.
Maybe you can leave the board and come back 5 years from now.
And it's still
Right.
there.
And we'll still be dealing with that, so.
However, we are going to seek the employer and employee contributions that were due for the time that wasn't reported, and we're going to adjust his benefit, correct?
We are, yes, and that should be done as of September. His benefit should have been amended, should have
Not
been.
until we receive the contributions, how can we give him
We,
credit for?
we collect his contributions through adjustment of his benefit, the member contributions. So it's the employer contributions we're waiting on.
Yes, well, I can tell you,
It's not been modified.
it will be for October if that's what we need to do, but we were gonna send a letter to the employer requesting the contribution.
Right, but not until we knew that it was filed for, so I'm sorry, I thought we
Yeah.
had decided we would go ahead and modify the
It would-
benefit.
So we will, though, that benefit will be modified, which will be a little bit different than how things have been the previous several, however many years this has been going on at this
Right.
point. We never have adjusted his benefit.
So it's gonna go up
Ways.
because
No.
The net will be down, but it won't be near as much down as it would be if he didn't get credit for those several years. Yeah, but it's still gonna be a net reduction.
But that won't happen until we get money from the employer?
To be determined. I mean, we have to get, in order to give him credit, we have to get contributions on
Right.
that.
We can further adjust the benefit if need be. We're gonna get the contributions from the employer. They've already committed to paying those. So, I mean, it's just a matter of, right. So,
I hope you're right.
I hope I'm right too, but I'm quite certain that I am, so. But again, Mr. Zabrocki's unpaid employee contributions, we recover by actuarially adjusting his benefit as well. There's a possibility that the employer will pay the unpaid employee contributions as well, but because they had previously committed to doing that as well. But, you know, given the lapse of time, we made sure that it was part of the determination, part of the hearing and part of the determination that Mr. Zabrocki ultimately was responsible for paying those unpaid employee contributions.
So let's just say for a second, that employee pays both sides of it. Doesn't that by itself take care of the issue? No, because we paid him when we should have paid.
So unpaid contributions is only part of it, overpaid benefits is the other part.
And so that would be the only part that would be adjusted, or we can't adjust that
Until we
until
get
the
this
court.
determination.
No, we would adjust it, yeah.
Okay.
We would adjust.
Adjusting
We're
the
gonna
overpaid
adjust,
benefits as well.
essentially,
For
it
now.
sounds like here in October, we'll adjust for both, right? But if the employer were to pony up and pay for the contributions,
Then
then
it's only
then
the
his
other part.
benefit we would recalculate, what the adjustment needs to be just on the overpaid benefits.
And that amortizes over how many years
Yeah.
of expectancy?
Forever. If we actuarially adjust the benefit, the adjusted benefit is the benefit forever. He,
Whether that's 6 months or 16
Right,
years.
Yeah.
I think has a, filed for, option A, a joint total, I believe, so it's for both his lifetime and his joint benefits.
Does that ensure that we get that money back over the years? Or how do you close?
No, it's based on the mortality tables, so no, it doesn't.
No.
That's correct.
And there's no other.
We'll get more if he lives a long
Right.
Okay.
More or
We
less.
can't get our portion back any other way. You can't write us a check.
we can, but
Depends on the court says.
time. We don't,
Court has to determine.
yeah, but
actually, it's up to us. In our statutes, in the new provisions in Part 12, how we collect the benefits back is up to us. But if we go for a payback, we're limited to doing that at 50% of the benefit amount until it's paid back. He could pay us a check for the full amount. Typically, you know,
Usually not gonna do that.
the default for us is actuarial adjustment of the benefit. And
Do you remember off the top of your head what the overpayment has been? Give or take some.
I know it's well over 100,000 on benefit payments, like 160 or so, yeah.
Plus interest.
Right.
that's included.
Yeah, it's, yeah, I think that is included, but then there's the unpaid employee and employee
Right.
contributions plus theirs as well, yeah. I have, yeah, that's all broken up in the spreadsheet. It's ready, we haven't calculated it, so.
Yeah.
It's in the folder.
I'll go back and look.
It's a lot.
It's a
Keep
lot.
wanting to forget that.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how many boxes I get to carry to the district court. So other than that, unless there are other questions on Zabrocki, that's really the only thing pending at this point.
So, there's no, election of officers we're on to. Election of the chair, vice chair, and our committee appointments.
Can I simply move that we retain the current status of all boards?
Second.
Wow.
I was gonna ask you how you were doing.
I already texted her, she's okay.
Okay.
Well, unless somebody else really wants to do this job, come on, you guys.
You're good.
Oh, yeah, yeah, forget the public. All right, it's been moved and seconded, any further discussion? All those in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. And everybody's good with their committee appointments?
That was part of the motion.
If you're not, too bad
All right, so we need to quickly close the meeting for a disability, for our disability applications. All right, we'll call the meeting back to order. For the an action item to approve the applications for disability retirement benefits on behalf of, to discontinue the disability review on behalf of Donna F. Erickson.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. And we also have the discontinued disability review of Brad O. King.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying
Aye.
aye. Chair votes aye as well. All right, we have public comment, but again, no public here, so we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well.